A thin square of gold rests on a cushion of air, and a quiet breath lays it down so lightly that it clings like morning frost. Beside it, a small bowl of egg and pigment waits, the color no larger than a walnut. Welcome, and whenever you're ready to drift off, let your shoulders soften and your breath slow. Tonight, let's quietly explore for rooms where patient hands kept the world steady. We'll begin in a Byzantine icon workshop at dawn, where gold leaf meets egg tempera and halos learn to shine. We'll climb to a medieval forest apiary, where honey sleeps in high hollow pines and smoke teaches calm. Then we'll sit in a Persian loom room in Kashan, where yarn turns into a garden of knots and the comb beats a soft rhythm. And finally, we'll ride a night mail car, where letters find their places by lamplight and the rails hum a gentle line. The pace will stay slow, the language simple, and each sound small and sleep safe. No sudden turns, no sharp edges, just steady motions. Ordinary tools and the hush of everyday work. As you settle in for the night, we'll notice small textures: bowl under gold, rope scars on bark, indigo on wool, pencil on a pigeonhole tag. If your mind is ready, we'll begin where breath sets down a sheet of light and color learns patience. The forest wakes in slow layers. Mist lifts from reeds and slips between trunks. Needles hold beads of water that do not hurry. Somewhere, a woodpecker taps once, then listens to its own echo. The path underfoot is soft with last year's pine, brown and springy like felt. A man walks with an easy load. Linen shirt, wool sash, felt cap pulled low. Over one shoulder he carries a coil of hemp rope thick as his thumb. Tied to the coil are the tools he trusts: a small hand axe with a smooth handle, a smoke pot made of clay, a bone knife wrapped in linen, and a narrow wooden paddle the length of his forearm. In a net bag hang two plugs of woven straw and bark. A short ladder of cord and flat wooden steps lies folded like a sleeping fish. He stops at a clearing where pines grow tall and straight. Halfway up their trunks, oval scars show old work. Hive mouths cut in the bark years ago and taught to heal around the opening. Each oval is a doorway to a hollow carved deep in the heartwood, lined with propolis and guarded by small, busy citizens. Some doorways were a sign. Near the lip, a carved mark to crossed cuts, a hook, a circle says who keeps this hive. Forest law here remembers such marks better than names. He lays the rope at the foot of a chosen tree and looks up. The hive mouth faces east, polite to morning. Resin beads along the cut edge, amber tears that stop mid-fall. He touches the bark, and then his forehead, a small habit. This tree has fed his household for years. He knows the roughness of this ladder of knots the way a pot knows a hand. Smoke first. He fills the clay pot with a twist of dry punkwood and a pinch of rotten log, sets a coal from last night's ember, and breathes until a thin thread of smoke curls from the lip. He caps the pot with a perforated lid and tests the stream with his palm. Not too much. Bees prefer a gentle story, not a shout. The rope harness goes around his waist and around the tree with a broad band. He sets the first wooden step against the trunk, pulls the rope snug with a hip, and stands. The next step goes higher. Pull, stand. The tree's skin whispers under his soles. Resin wakes and perfumes the air clean, sweet, a little like honey that has learned to be pine. Climbing like this is an old practice. In this place and century, it is common to meet honey at height. He reaches the oval and settles into the work. The plug in the hive mouth is a woven cork of straw and bark. It breaks its seal with a small sigh. Warm air flows out, rich with the smell of comb and wings. The bees speak in a single note that changes as the smoke drifts in. He tips a little gray into the hollow, waits to breaths, and hears the tone soften. Calm is a shared craft. He grips the wooden paddle and the bone knife. The paddle is narrow with edges rounded, friendly to wax. The bone knife has a flat back and a keen front, sharpened on stone and polished with fat. He slides the paddle under the first comb, lifting gently so it does not tear. The bone knife trims the capped honey where it joins the roof of the hollow. White caps, neat as stitches, part in shoe cells the color of weak tea. Honey glows without sparkle. It keeps its own dignity. He knows what to cut and what to leave. Brood comb stays, winter stores in the center stay. He looks for the pale, sealed sections near the outer curve, heavy with the season's kindness. The paddle supports. The knife releases. His hands move slow, steady, respectful. Each piece lowers into a linen cloth he has tucked under the rope at his belt. The cloth's weave is loose enough to breathe, tight enough to guard. Between cuts he rests the smoke pot in a notch near the mouth, letting the thin thread drift. Bees settle deeper into the hollow bodies warmed by their gathered breath. Bees do not belong to him, not really. He belongs to a corridor of trees and a set of careful habits. Honey and wax will leave with him, but most of the hive remains to go on. When the cloth is full, he ties it with a simple knot and hooks it to his belt. A cord basket waits below. He lowers the bundle on a line, hand under hand, watching as it turns once, twice, then steadies. The rope strokes his palm like an old cat. On the ground the basket receives what the season gave. He leans into the hollow again for a last look. With the paddle he smooths a rough edge where knife met comb, making the cut site even. He inspects the inner bark for damp or mold. None today? Good. He takes a pinch of propolis from a corner dark, sticky, resinous, and warms it in his fingers. He presses it along a hairline crack near the mouth, sealing a draft. He lifts the smoke pot, breathes once more into the belly of the hive, and sets the woven plug back into the opening. The plug's rim meets bark with a faint grit, and then a soft click as straw finds the mark it learned last year. He descends the ladder the way he climbed it. Step, loosen, slide the band step. Pine sap darkens his palms. He rubs them together and smiles. On the ground, he turns to the tree and scratches a small line near his mark. A tally notched into living wood, not to own more, only to remember which hives he has visited this round. In many forests, wax is tax and offering both. Monasteries ask for it, markets praise it, and houses need it. Honey sweetens porridge and keeps fruit kindly. The work is quiet, but its path is long. He checks the basket. The cloth bundles shine through their weave. A fly visits and leaves. He adds a lid-thin board and birch bark tie so the forest will not help itself. He drinks from a wooden cup. The water is cold, kept in a skin near the ground where moss is kind. A heel of bread waits in his pouch with a pinch of salt. He eats without ceremony, sitting on a fallen trunk that smells of damp and slow change. The day stretches. He will visit to more hives before noon, then carry wax and honey home in a frame slung from his shoulders. Later, the wax will melt in a wide pot strained through linen that will go on to other lives' wicks perhaps, or padding for a shoe. Honey will settle in a clay jar. A lid of leather tied with cord will keep it honest. Some will travel to a market by river. Some will feed his family when snow makes the world simple. All of it will taste of place, pine in the nose, meadow in the mouth, and the fine clean of this cool air. He stands and gathers rope, ladder tools. The smoke pot he empties, grinding the last ember out with a stick and covering the ash. He brushes the plug with his hand once, a silent thanks that has no need of words. Then he steps onto the path, and the forest closes behind him like a curtain that knows its part. The path bends toward a wet place where sedge grows in wide cones and frogs practice patience. The pine trunks are farther apart here. Their feet drink from dark water that moves without appearing to move. Dragonflies draw slow blue lines in the warm air. The beekeeper knows a hive above this marshy glade, a good one, mild in weather like this. He tests the ground with his staff and chooses a drier thread between the hummocks. At the base of the chosen pine he lays down his bundle in order, rope coil to the left, ladder steps to the right, smoke pot above the line, basket below. He speaks to no one and everything at once with a small nod. The hive mouth is higher here, cut long ago by someone whose mark is a hooked line into notches. His own sign, carved lower down on the same tree, is a circle with a short tail. Forest law is simple, and old each hive has its keepers. Strangers touch only in need or with permission. Fines are paid in wax, which suits all parties. In places like this, law walks with rope on its shoulder. He fills the clay pot with punk and a shred of dried horsetail, sets a coal into the bed and breathes until smoke rises thin and steady. At the tree he loops the broad band and leans his weight into it. The first footboard kisses bark and holds. He climbs in the quiet rhythm learned by repetition. Pull step, tighten, pull step, tighten. The pine gives back a smell of resin and cool damp. A small owl, surprised by a daytime guest, blinks from a nearby fork and decides to become bark. At the oval mouth he rests, feet planted against the trunk, hips in the rope sling. The woven plug is sound, but slightly stuck. Marsh air does that. He worries it free with the bone knife and catches it before it falls. Warmth breathes out. Bees voice a low note, and then flatten to quieter as smoke tells its soft story. He does not flood the hollow. He gives only enough to slow the news. Instead of the linen cloth used earlier, he prepares 2 combs of birch bark thin, peeled in spring and kept rolled with small sticks because pieces from this hive are usually long and prefer a firmer cradle. He opens one cone and sets its seam against a wooden peg fitted near the mouth years ago for just this purpose. The cone's pale inside shows the memory of the tree it once was, fine lines like the rings on a thumb. He slides the wooden paddle under a length of capped comb and lifts. The bone knife follows, separating the sweet weight from the roof. The cells hold like ordered rain. He lays the slab into the birch cone and lets it sit at a tilt so slowly weeping honey will gather in the narrow end and not drown the wax. He ties the cone with a twist of lime bast and moves to the next. Brood comb and pollen comb remain untouched. He marks their position in his head the way he marks paths with his feet. Between cuts he smooths rough edges with the paddle and checks the hollow with the small mirror he carries, just a polished shard of tin bound to a stick. In the dimness the mirror gathers enough sky to let him see the back wall, dry and clean, with old propolis-like dark varnish between seams. A slight draught breathes from an unseen crack. He softens a ball of pitch between his palms and presses it along the leak until the air chooses a new path. Bees prefer a house that minds its doors. When both birch cones hold their share, he ties them to his belt and lowers them on separate lines so they will not knock together. The ground receives them in a nest of sedge laid ready by habit. He replaces the plug, brushing the rim with his thumb as if explaining that all is well. He all decides to be a small, slow wind and leaves without leaving sound. On the ground he sets a small tally at the base of the pine, 3 short cuts and a longer that ties them. It is not for counting today, he knows the day by its smell. It is for winter, when memory likes to see what it can no longer touch. He writes the same mark on a flat of birch bark with a coal stub and tucks it into the basket lid. Back at the yard, which is a clearing with a low shed and 2 troughs cut from split logs, the afternoon lengthens into work that does not mind length. He builds a small fire under the tripod and sets on it a wide-bellied pot half full of water. The water will never boil. It will sit and think. Over it he places a second vessel, shallower, so the heat will be kind. Comb from the birch cones and linen bundle goes into this upper pan. He breaks it with a wooden spoon, not to harm, only to help. Honey loosens from wax and sinks like amber fish into the warm water below. The shed fills with a smell that is more than sweet, a smell of field and tree, of air boiled into memory. He lifts the broken wax with a slotted ladle into the second trough, a long wooden cradle lined with coarse linen. A stone set under one end makes a shallow slope. He pours warm water over the heap, not hot, urging the honey to run through the cloth. It threads out slow and clear, carrying bits of comb dust that settle like silt. This may seem wasteful by later habits, but here and now slow washing is thought to make a cleaner candle and a calmer flame. From the first pot he ladles honey into a clay jar, steady as oil. Bits of wax ride the surface. He catches them with a willow twig bent into a loop. The jar, warm still, goes to the cool earth at the edge of the shed, where a shallow hole has been lined with flat stones. It will rest there until evening takes the last dust from it. Later, a leather lid tied with narrow bark will teach it to stay. In the second trough the wax gathers, pale gold, cooling in rafts. He lifts them onto a board and, when they firm, presses each into a shallow wooden mold rubbed with fat. The cakes keep the shape of the mold round with a rim like a coin and carry a stamp on one side, his sign cut into the block. Stacked 3 and 3, they look like quiet suns. Monks will trade salt or smoked fish for these, and sometimes a paper of letters. In winter, his own house will welcome a candle that listens rather than complains. Beeswax burns without the hard voice of tallow. He twists a few wicks as the wax waits, flax strands rolled on his thigh with a touch of ash water, then dried on a cord. Wicks live in a small box with needles and a bone spool. He saves any cream crumbs of wax in a pouch. Nothing that burned under bees should be wasted. He strains the last pan of honey through fine linen tighter weave, cloth that once was a shirt, and watches the thin thread draw a hill in the jar. A fly thinks about landing, then thinks better. The jar is nearly full. He leaves a little space at the top for quiet. He wipes the rim with a damp rag and sets the lid, pressing the tie knot flat so winter fingers can untie it without waking the house. Before the light leans away from the yard, he puts tools back where their hands know to find them tomorrow. Bone knife in its wrap, paddle on its peg, smoke pot upturned to dry, ladder steps stacked under cover, rope coiled loose so it does not remember kinks. He washes his hands in cool water scented by a thumb of crushed pine needles. Sap fades, skin feels useful again. He tastes a spoon of the new honey, just one, so he can name the day to himself. The flavor says meadow near water, clover near rye, and a little willow. He nods as if someone had agreed with him. In the distance, a church bell counts a number that does not need to be exact. He covers the jars with a cloth and carries the wax cakes into the shed, where a shelf waits with last year's round ends that smell like a lost summer. Evening folds itself along the tree line. Bats begin their patient handwriting in the sky. The yard grows quiet in the best way. Tomorrow there will be 2 more hives and a visit from a trader who walks the river road with salt in a leather sack and news in his pocket for now. The forest holds the man and his shed like a cupped hand. Morning sifts through older leaves along the river path. Water moves like a long thought, not urgent, only certain. The beekeeper walks with a frame across his shoulders. On one side a basket with wax cakes stamped from yesterday, on the other a clay jar wrapped in plaited reeds. The strap creaks in a familiar way. His staff touches the ground where the bank turns soft, testing the soggy places before his feet do. At a bend where a willow leans toward its own reflection, a trader waits. He has come many summers, always with the same leather bag and the same patient eyes. On his mat he spreads small fortunes that a household understands, a twist of salt the size of a fist, a bunch of iron nails wrapped in rag, 2 needles bright as fish bones, a little mirror in a wooden frame, a coil of linen thread, a knife stone rubbed smooth like river glass. They greet each other with a nod that means nothing needs explaining. Trade is not quick here. The beekeeper sets the wax cakes by 3s, their stamped faces turned upward. The trader balances one on a small scale that hangs from a loop, waits in the other pan clinking like quiet teeth. He tests the honey too, tilting the jar so the thread falls, and lifts like silk. They talk in small pieces about the road, about the monastery's need for wax ahead of the feast, about a ferry rope that frayed in a storm, and has now been mended with a splice that will outlive the boatman. They exchange as if folding cloth, 2 cakes of wax for a fist of salt, and the needles, 3 for nails, and good thread, a measure of honey for the sharpening of the bone knife on the trader's stone, and a promise of fish when the weir is full. The trader wraps each gift in bark or rag so nothing knocks. The beekeeper nicks one of his wax cakes with the knife, takes a grain on the blade, and lets it soften between thumb and forefinger. Clean dot, no grit. The trader nods as if to say he already knew. When the mat is rolled and the bag buckled, they stand a moment and look at the river, which does not ask to be admired. The trader touches 2 fingers to the brim of his cap. The beekeeper lifts his staff in answer. They leave by different paths that know their feet. Back in the yard the shade lies short. A quiet task waits under the eaves, weaving new hive plugs. The old ones, useful still, show tooth marks and a little wet, the way straw does after a long season. He brings out bundles of rye straw kept dry under a thatch lip, and a coil of lime bast cord, a soft ribbon peeled from linden and dried, then raywet today until it remembers how to bend without breaking. He starts with a tight ring, 3 straws laid in a small circle and stitched with bast, round and round with a rhythm that never looks at the clock. The coil grows outward like a snail shell. Every few turns he presses the edge against a wooden gauge the size of a hive mouth he knows, so the plug will sit without argument. A curved awl opens a path for the bast, the cord slips through and tightens with a soft squeak. The straw ends are tucked under as the coil turns, each cut at an angle so no rough edge asks for attention. When the disc is broad enough, he starts to dome it a little by pulling stitches tighter on the inner turn. The plug rises toward a shallow cap straw, thick, airlight. At the center he leaves a thumb-sized hollow that can be opened with a twist if winter air grows damp and the hive wants to breathe more. He trims the dome smooth and rubs its face with a piece of pitch warmed in his hands, just enough to teach it to shed a small rain and to remember the shape of the opening. Along the rim he runs a narrow band of bast, binding the edge so it will not fray when hands and weather-tested. For hives whose lips are old and splintered, he makes a different pattern, a plug of bark and straw together, a bark oval cut from spring birch or alder, softened in warm water and stitched to a straw face so the smooth bark sits outward and slides. Home without argument. He pricks his mark a circle with a tail into the bark with the point of his awl. Forest law is polite but clear, a mark says who will return. He sets the new plugs in a row on the bench, where sun and pine scent teach them to be ready. Beside them he arranges a little tray for smoke, a lidded clay pot, and small bundles for burning touchwood from a tender fungus dried in the rafters, punk from rotted willow, curls of birch bark, and a herb or two. He pinches a bit of mugwort between finger and thumb. Its smell is green and shy. Not much is needed. Bees answer to low, cool smoke. Thick, hot smoke tells the wrong story. He packs the pot like a small garden, a base of touchwood to take a coal, a piece of punk to keep the ember honest, a curl of bark for a quick start, a breath of mugwort for calm. He lights and tests, puts his wrist in the stream, never the back of the hand, always the soft skin, so heat will speak earlier. The smoke that leaves the pot today is gray as river stone and slow as fog. Good. He mends the rope while the pot mutters to itself. The climbing band's broad back has known bark this summer. He rubs tallow into the outside where resin drank it away. At the splice he adds a whipping of waxed thread, neat turns laid one beside the next with the patient vanity of things never seen. If the rope lives well, it will keep him living well. He turns each wooden step in his hands to feel for splinters that might quarrel with skin. Those that do are sanded with a scrap of shark skin kept for this single job. In the late afternoon he reads the sky the way he reads a hive. High, thin mare's tails run from west to east cirrus that often say weather will change, not today, perhaps tomorrow evening. A pale ring faintly rims the sun, ice far above has made a halo. The wind is a breath from the south, warm enough that ants at the yard's edge still write low lines, and do not build their little walls. Swallows fly high and lazy. Midges stand in thin columns over the damp places. Pine cones on the shed roof gape a little but not wide. All this makes a page that says, "Come tonight, cool tomorrow, perhaps a light rain by the second evening." He says it aloud, not for the trees, not for himself, but because speaking makes memory slower and more sure. Bees write their own forecast. At the edge of the clearing they travel with baskets barely full. The heavy bloom of linden is past, and the meadow's late flowers give what they can. Returning foragers land soft and walk unhurried. Guards at the hive mouths are wakeful, not sharp. When summer leans into its later part, bees spend more time talking to each other at thresholds, and the beekeeper listens to their side of the conversation. If they stand tall and widen the entrance with their bodies, he knows heat is their concern. If they fan with their bellies to the air, he brings a windbreak. If they start to quarrel with neighbors in a show of loud wings and legs, he will narrow the door with a chip of wood and a prayer for patience. He checks his own small signs as well. The bowstring by the door pulls tighter in the evening damp. The linden bast cord on the ladder loosens. He tightens one, slackens the other. The staff he uses at the river weighs a touch more. The reed-wrapped jar feels cool through its skin. Even frogs recite weather, their chorus thin tonight, perhaps thinking of the moon's smallness. Before dusk, he visits to tree mouths with the new plugs tucked under an arm. The old corks lift with the particular sound straw makes when it leaves honest bark, half crunch, half sigh. He seats the new ones with a twist and a press. Each finds its place like a word fits a line already waiting for it. Round one opening he sneers a finger of propolis saved from earlier bee's own glue, pine-scented, and stubborn to seal what bark left untidy. He touches the mark near the lip, not to rename, only to greet. As light thins, he hangs the smoke pot under the eaves to sleep, a lid on its breath and a stone on its lid. He coils the rope and lays it wide. He brushes the bench clear with a bundle of twigs tied in their own handle. The yard cools like a cup forgotten and found again. All's rehearse their single note. A fox writes a short sentence in dust and edits it with a tail. He stands a moment where the path leaves the clearing and reads the sky one more time. The cirrus have drifted a little north. The halo has walked off, not good. He imagines tomorrow's work to ladder's worth of climbing, 3 plugs to test, a short walk with wax to the monastery gate where the candlemaker keeps his books. He feels the day settle like a cloak. Inside the shed, a last task. He ties 4 wicks to a crossbar in readiness. Linen spun earlier on his thigh, rubbed with a breath of ash water so they will drink wax, and then speak with a small, steady voice. He sets the crossbar onto pegs over the trough, just so, and smiles at the neatness of something that has not happened yet. He closes the door, leaves the latch loose for the cat, and walks the sandy path home. The forest makes the kind of dark that does not argue. Needles breathe. Water keeps counting. The morning walks beside him like an old friend. He carries a frame over one shoulder with 9 wax cakes tied in pairs, and one resting alone like a small son. A jar of honey rides in a reed cradle against his hip. The path to the monastery lifts out of the pines and opens to rye stubble and low stone. Geese talk in the field with the same opinion they had yesterday. At the gatehouse a little bell waits on a hook. He taps it once with his knuckle. The porter looks up from a bench where he mends a shoe, recognizes both man and wax, and waves him through. The candle room sits near the kitchen, so warm water is never far. Beeswax lives there the way flour lives near ovens, useful, respected, ordinary. Inside, the air is honey sweet and clean. An iron pot set in a ring of bricks holds wax the color of straw tea. A shallow pan of water sits beside it for tempering and for safe hands. On a trestle, a wooden yoke with two notch-rails waits to carry wicks. The monk who minds this room is neat as a shelf. He greets the beekeeper with a nod that includes the pot, the ledger, and the day. Business first, but not brisk. The cakes are weighed on a balance that remembers fairness. The monk cuts a mark in his tablet with a stylus and reads back the line from last visit, finger-writing the grooves. Payment is in the usual goods: a coil of good linen thread, a small bag of salt, a flask of lamp oil for the beekeeper's shed, and a promise of reading if a letter comes from a cousin upriver. They add one more thing this time, because Autumn walks closer, a length of wool cloth to wrap the man's waist under the climbing rope when cold makes bark bite harder. While the ledger dries, the beekeeper stays to help with a casting. He ties 8 short wicks to the yoke, two to a stick, pairs like little bridges. Dipping is a patient rhythm. The wicks go down into warm wax, rise, and hang over the pan's lip to think. Down again, up again, on and on, each pass laying a thin coat that cools to firmness. After a while, the wicks have become candles, still slender, reeds that remember water. He smooths a small ridge with wet fingers, a trick taught to him here. The monk trims the heads with a thumbnail so they will light without complaint. The smell of bees, and summer stands up from the pot and asks for no attention. They set the dipped pears across a pole to finish pale and straight. For the church they will make thicker ones by pressing warm sheets around a stout wick, sheet wax rolled smooth with a round of wood until the seam hides. The beekeeper watches the monk fix a tiny lead weight at the end of a new wick so it will hang true in the next dipping. Such small help keeps flame polite on winter mornings when hands are cold and not many words are wanted. He keeps back 3 of his own cakes and borrows a corner of the room to cast household lights. From a gourd he uncoils the linen wicks he twisted yesterday and knots them to his small crossbar. Dip, lift, rest. He makes 6, slim as little fingers, for nights when mending needs a friendlier light than rushes can give. He pours a spoon of wax into a shallow dish and presses the foot of each candle in turn, making a stand. When they cool, he wraps them in linen kept just for this cloth that smells faintly of smoke and soap and thyme. Before leaving, he oils the hinge on the candle room's shutter with a bead from the lamp flask. The monk raises 2 fingers in thanks and returns to his weighings. Out in the court, bread cools on a board, and the baker's door sighs on leather hinges. The beekeeper eats a heel with a pinch of salt and a mouth of well water, then takes the path home with the wool length under his arm. Back in the yard, tools step forward for attention. The climbing belt lies on the bench, a broad strap of leather and bast that has known resin, sun, and a winter or 2. He warms it with his hands and a breath near the fire, then rubs in tallow until the surface drinks no more. At the buckle he slits a new pin of horn through the loop, smoother than the old iron and kinder in frost. He checks the stitching along the belt's edge and runs fresh waxed thread through places where summer asked too much. The thread seats into its neighbors and looks as if it grew there. The rope gets its own care. He shakes it out long so twists can leave. He feels along its lave for hard spots where sap or dirt taught stiffness. He works them loose with his thumbs and a dab of oil. The splice at mid-length takes a whipping of fresh linen twine, neat turns marching together like a well-bundled reed. Wooden steps, sanded yesterday, receive a new coat of thin pine pitch on their ends where water likes to stay. He drills one new hole through a step that had developed a hairline crack, puts in a wooden trunnel, and trims it flush so nothing snags. The rope ladder, rolled again, lies calm. Weather asks for small preparations. He walks to the nearest hives and listens with his ear at each plug. The sound says contentment, not crowded, not anxious. He narrows to entrances with slips of wood, making the doorway easier to guard when nights grow long. Round one tree that stands in a windy reach, he ties a windbreaker sheet of wicker that once stood as a fence panel lashed to 3 stakes so the north breath goes around instead of through. He tucks a handful of straw into a shallow hollow above one door where rain made a habit of pausing. A smear of clay and pine pitch along a seam answers a question before it can be asked. He cuts a shallow channel with his spade on the uphill side of a trunk so a storm's brief river will run past and not make a small lake at the foot. In a lean-to near the yard he sets birch bark in a dry stack. When snow decides to visit, the fire will want dry hands. He gathers herbs that help smoke in cold weather: mugwort, a little thyme dried on a string, and shavings of old applewood saved after a neighbor trimmed a tree. Not much. The best smoke is always the smallest story. In the shed he tests the little mirror on its stick, wiping its face with a scrap until it catches light without fuss. He checks the clay smoke pot for cracks by tapping it with a fingernail. It answers with a true ring. The bone knife's edge meets the trader's stone briefly, and thanks it by growing quiet sharp again. He strips a narrow band of bast from the length he traded for earlier, so tomorrow's plug can have a fresh binding at the lip where winter fingers will press. Afternoon thins. High geese pass in a thin row, one line, then another, each practicing the letter they will write next month across the sky. The beekeeper notes their height and direction without drama. He turns the small candles he made on the pole so the last cool reaches all sides, then wraps them in linen and tucks them into a wooden box with a sliding lid. On the inside of the lid he has rubbed a pinch of beeswax so it runs smoothly and smells like summer when opened. He tries the belt over the new wool and under his jacket, shifts the buckle until it lies where bone prefers, and leans back into the rope to see if the slide still obeys a hip. It does not. The steps bite in the air the way they will bite in bark. He nods to no one and sets them down. As evening begins, he pours a little warm wax what clung to the pot into a small shallow lamp he carved from soft wood. A short wick drinks. The flame stands quiet. He writes a mark on the doorpost with charcoal, 3 small lines, and a long so tomorrow's plan can find him in the gray before speech. He hangs the rope by its peg, closes the shed with the latch loose for the cat, and looks at the tops of the pines. They move a little, just enough to speak of weather that will be fair enough for one more good climb before rain. Supper is simple. He breaks bread, dips it into a spoon of honey taken from the jar to close the day with what the day gave, and eats with his hands warm over the wooden lamp. Pine smell, wax scent, wool against his waist, tools at peace. These are the small sums a season keeps. Dawn arrives with a light that knows its manners. The air's cooler on the wrist. He steps from the shed with the rope over his shoulder and the belt around his wool-wrapped waist. A shallow cloud bank rests on the horizon like folded linen. He reads it as a hint. One more quiet harvest before rain teaches the forest to whisper differently. He chooses 3 trees that face the first sun, and stand on higher ground. The first holds his mark, the circle with a small tail, clean and honest near the old scar. He lays out the tools as always: smoke pot, ladder steps, basket, birch cones, and sets a coal into the clay belly. A breath, then another, and smoke threads upward, not urgent, not lazy. The climb is familiar and kindly. Bark presses through the belt. The rope's broad band leans into him like a palm between friends. At the oval mouth he rests, listening to the hive's single note. It is low and even, the sound of work without quarrel. He tilts a little smoke inward, counts his two breaths, and watches bees settle deeper, as if the hollow had become a warm sleeve. He lifts the woven plug and sets it under his elbow. With paddle and bone knife he opens the season's last sweet door. The comb he chooses is pale at its caps, heavy near the edge, the kind that keeps well in the cool months. He trims the seam where wax joins wood, supports the slab with the paddle, and lays it into a linen cradle he has tied to the rope at his hip. He takes no more than a third from this hollow. Winter belongs to the bees first. He smooths a roughness with the paddle's back so the hive will forget his hand quickly. He checks the inner walls with the little mirror, dry and neat, dark with old propolis, good. He lowers the linen bundle to the ground and secures it in the basket with a slip of bast. Before reseating the plug, he warms a strip of pitch in his palm and presses it along a seam that learned to gape in the heat. A gentle twist of the straw dome, and it finds home with the sound he likes best, half crunch, half sigh. At the second tree, above a low swell, the hive's voice is higher, a touch thinner. He knows this family has worked longer on brood and less on honey. He lifts only a small piece, no more than a hand and a half, and leaves the rest as a statement of trust. At the mouth he narrows the opening with a wedge of bark slipped under the plug's edge, so cold air will ask permission rather than stride in. He ties a thin straw mat above the cut to turn rain away. A mark goes at the foot of the trunk, 3 short, then 1 long, to tell his winter self what his summer self knew. The third tree stands where two paths think about crossing. A wood ant line runs near the base like a thin string. He steps wide of their journey and climbs. The hollow is strong with honey scent. Here he uses the birch cones because the cone runs long and prefers a firm hold. He fills 1 cone and then a second, tying each with bast so the join sits tight. He leaves a small crescent of capped cells near the outer curve as a gift back. Bees remember kindness, as well as people. Before closing, he checks the roof for damp and coats a thin crack with softened propolis. When his hand leaves, the hollow smells more of resin and less of hen. Back on the ground he sets each cone in a nest of sedge, covers the basket with a lid, and tightens its cord. He drinks from his wooden cup and eats a slice of bread with a thumb of salt, the simple meal that keeps hands steady. The sky has climbed, the cloud bank lifting and spreading, a sheet being shaken by slow arms. He plans the afternoon, rendering wax in small pans, setting honey to settle, sealing 2 hives against a draft he felt last week. At the yard he builds a quiet fire, no taller than his wrist. The wide-bellied pot takes water, not to boil, only to be helpful. The shallow pan above receives broken comb, honey slips away and rests in the water below like calm light. He ladles it through linen into clay jars and wipes their rims with a wet cloth, the motion so practiced it happens without speaking to the hand. Each jar gets a leather lid tied with narrow bark. the knot flattened in front so winter fingers can persuade it open without waking the house. A smear of warm wax along the seam persuades the lid to be faithful. Wax floats pale in the upper pan. He lifts it, lets it firm on a board, and presses it into round molds rubbed with fat. Stamped cakes cooling on a shelf make a quiet parade. He saves the last small bits, the crumbs the size of fingernails, because crumbs become wicks or seals, and nothing that once knew bees should be lost. Sealing hives comes next. He walks the row of trunks with a basket of small helps, plugs he wove yesterday, straw mats, a pouch of propolis, a knife, a strip of bark. At one mouth he fits a new plug, twisting and pressing until straw and wood become neighbors. At another he pastes a smear of clay and pitch into a corner that like to sip rain. Where an entrance feels to open, he slides a chip of wood under the plug to make a winter doorway no wider than to bees. He cuts a shallow runnel above a foot where water used to loiter, so storm water will choose a different gain. Each tree receives a touch of the hand, and the hand learns something in return: tone, smell, a drift of air, the grain of resin under the thumb. He tallies as he goes, not on paper but on bark and bone. A thin notch near his mark for visited, a second notch for sealed, a tiny cross for leave well alone until spring. The forest keeps the ledger in its skin. For himself he writes a line on a sliver of birch and tucks it into the shed door lintel marks that only he reads, 3 uprights for 3 trees, a dot on the second to say less honey, a curled stroke over the third to say remember the ants. Afternoon cools. He renders a last small pan of wax and pours a lampful for evening work. He twists 2 more wicks from linen, rolling them on his palm with ash water until they remember their shape. He tests one in a shallow wooden lamp. It burns with a low, even flame, the kind that makes sewing easy and silence easier. Rain arrives as a practice, not yet a habit. First drops that test leaves, then a steady shift. The yard smells like pine and clean earth. He shifts jars into the shed, spreads a cloth over the cooling cakes, and hangs the rope to dry with space between corals. The ladder steps lean wood to wood, pleased with their simple geometry. Before dark, he walks once more among the trees. At each hive he puts his ear near the plug. The notes are different now, rounded, low, with a slow heart. He speaks a sentence he has spoken for years, the same every time, not a charm, not a petition, only a statement of respect. Then he goes home by a path that keeps his feet above roots when the forest chooses to be wet. Supper is rye and onion, and a spoon of honey eaten near the warm mouth of the small stove. He winds thread on a bone spool and patches a pocket. The candle he dipped at the monastery burns with a friendly voice that says the day did its work and that night knows what to do. When he sets the stub out, the wick smokes once and agrees to forget. By the door he draws 3 short marks, and along with a coal stub, then blows the coal out and pinches it safe. The marks will still be there in the first light when a new round begins, and later, when the forest wears white and bees dream in their warm, humming dark. From the cool breath of the pines and the patient talk of ropes and straw, we now travel and hurry to a tiled courtyard in Kashan, where wool, dye, and steady hands turn knots into a quiet garden on a loom. Before the first bow, the workshop is a dim, kind room that smells of wood shavings, warm glue, and a hint of ash. A shutter hangs open a hand's width. Cool air comes in, tasting of stone and the quiet street. On a low bench, a wooden panel waits under a linen cloth. Its surface has been dressed 4 days, layers of chalk gesso brushed on with care, each coat dried, each coat smooth with a piece of pumice, until the touch finds only cloud. The painter arrives without hurry. His wool robe whispers at the knees. A small brazier glows in the corner, coals folded into themselves, ready to lend a slow heat to glue and breath. He lifts the linen and reveals the panel. It is smooth and pale, the edges chamfered, the back crossed with two shallow battens to teach the wood to stay true. He rests his left palm on the surface, not to press, only to learn its temperature. It is cool, not good. Gesso likes to wake slowly. On a side table, a wooden box holds small dishes made from seashells. Inside them colors sleep beneath a film of water, azurite, the blue of a jar's shadow, green malachite quiet as wet grass, red cinnabar, steady and ripe, and a brown made from earth rubbed through cloth. Nearby a bowl of egg yolk and water waits, the mixture beaten till silk. The yolk has given up its skin and become a clear, golden binder. A little wine vinegar sits ready to remind each pigment how to live in the brush. He begins with the ground that teaches gold to shine. In a tiny pot, red bull earth colored by iron, and time has been mixed with a little glue. He dips a round brush, turns it against the pot's lip, and lays the bowl in thin, even coats where halos and bright ornaments will sit. The color is not loud. It is warm and deep, like a blush under skin. After each pass, he warms the bowl with breath and the gentle plane of his palm. The touch brings a faint, glad sheen. Under gold, this red will whisper fire. On a leather pad called a cushion, squares of gold leaf rest under a clean parchment guard. The sheets are thin enough to tremble at a whisper. He trims one with a knife so sharp the leaf hardly notices it has been parted. A squirrel hair gilder's tip soft, flat, and narrow waits beside the pad. He runs the tip through his hair once, the way his master taught him, to charge it with the small kindness that lifts gold without fear. The bowl, now tacky with breath warmth, calls for its light. He inhales, sets the tip near the leaf, and the gold rises as if it preferred to be held. He carries it over the halo's circle and exhales. The leaf settles like a quiet snowfall. A second sheet follows, and a third, each overlapping by the width of a hair. Where the leaf bridges a curve, he coaxes it with a fine badger brush that knows how to persuade without scolding. A fault line appears, a tiny crease as thin as a thread. He touches it with breath, and it melts into its neighbor, as though it had always lived there. He waits. Gold enjoys a pause. While it settles, he mixes the first color and underpainting for flesh that is not pink, but olive green. This may seem unusual now, but in his world, light grows from cool shadow. He grinds the pigment in a small shell with a drop of egg, a drop of water, and a sigh of vinegar. The brush sable, fine as whisker, drinks a little and points itself. He returns to the gold. With a burnisher of polished agate, he strokes the leaf in small arcs. The stone hums against the bowl. Under pressure, the metal awakens, not to glare, but to a soft, living shine that follows him like a tame flame. He lifts the panel and finds the sun. The first slant of day peeks through the shutter and lays a thin ribbon across the bench. The gold takes it and makes it round. Lines come next. He draws them lightly in charcoal, the way voice draws melody before words. An oval for a face, a long, quiet nose, the curve of a brow, the thin, attentive mouth. hands that bless, a palm open, fingers slender, joints marked with tiny ovals that will later glow with light. A border finds itself to lines close together, ready for red, and a string of small dots that will read as pearls when the day is older. He wets a rag with warm water and softens the gesso's tiniest dust at the panel's edge. A clean edge takes paint kindly. He tests the green flesh tone on the panel's margin, where a border will later hide it. It dries fast, eggs way with air. He nods once, not for anyone, only for the day. He lays in the first broad shapes, thin washes that behave like breathing. Shadow under the brow ridge, along the nose's side, beneath the lower lip and chin, in the hollow of the neck where the collar will lie. The green is not an end, it is the earth in which light will be planted. His brush returns to the shell for a little more, thins it with a drop, then lays another veil. He does not hurry. Egg temper prefers many thin voices to one loud one. On a stool, a boy apprentice, silent, eager, beats glue in a small pot to keep it friendly. He sets a length of linen to dry on a cord, cloth that will become a backing for another small panel. He watches the master's wrist, the angle of breath, the way a brush is wiped on a folded rag in the same place each time so order can find itself tomorrow. The room speaks in gentle ticks, wood creaking as it adjusts to warmth, coal shifting in the brazier, bristles whispering across a ground that feels like polished shell. The painter's own breath is slow and even. He mouths a prayer as a habit, not to ask, only to keep the rhythm learned from those who sat where he sits now. He lifts azurite from its shell and mixes a robe's first blue. Egg binds it into a velvet skin. He carries it to the panel and lays a thin coat within the drawn border, leaving a hairline of gesso to keep a clear seam against gold. The blue dries to a grain like fine sand. He smooths it with a badger brush's light sweep. Another coat will follow, and another, each one teaching depth to a flat world. He glances at the gold once more. Along the halo's inner edge, he incises a circle with a needle held like a pen, not cutting deep, only a suggestion. Tiny stars will be pressed later with a punch, each dot like a bright bead. For now the circle is enough, true to the compass pricked through a paper pattern onto the gesso 2 days ago. The apprentice brings warm water and sets it by the shells. The painter wets his brush, rings it with 2 fingers, and draws the first thin line of brown to mark the eye's upper lid. It is not eyeliner, it is quiet attention. He adds a breath of white to the iris's near side, not as a glint, only as air. The face remains mostly green. Light will come to it the way dawn arrives by degrees. Outside, the vendor's wooden wheels murmur over the stones. Somewhere in the next room, someone turns pages that smell of glue and incense. In this one, gold, egg, and earth make a small and steady world. The room is a little brighter now. Light through the narrow shutter makes a thin gold plank on the floorboards. Dust floats in it like tiny, slow birds. The panel lies quiet on the bench, halo sheeted in metal that remembers mountains and rivers before it learned to be leaf. The painter reaches for a small bundle of tools, punches with tips shaped like dots, rings, little stars, and short petals. Their handles are smooth from many mornings. He lays a strip of leather on the gold to rest his wrist, so skin will not mar what breath has set down. With a bone compass he finds the halo's center again, touches the needle to the bowl through the leaf just enough to mark a point that only he will see. On that point he works in patient circles, tapping the dot punch with a light hammer. The sound is barely there, like a bee knocking politely on a window. Each tap leaves a tiny well that drinks light differently from the flat. A second ring follows, then a third, this time alternating dots and little petals. No hurry. Tooling is counted by breaths. He changes to the star and sets for small bursts along the inner edge, north, south, east, west. Between them, he taps a fine broken line, almost a whisper, so the halo shows depth without noise. When he lifts the panel to look, the gold no longer feels like a flat coin. It seems to turn like a shallow bowl. Tooling, like prayer, teaches space to feel alive. Along the halo's inner border, he incises a hairline circle with an agate stylus. The leaf parts in a clean, bright groove. That line will catch light when the face is dark, like a rim of water at dusk. Satisfied, he lays the tools back on their cloth and returns the leather wrist-rest to its peg. The green underpainting of the flesh has dried to a quiet olive. He sets two shells together on the table, one with yellow earth ochre, the color of warm straw, and one with lead white, ground fine yesterday and kept under a skin of water. He mixes a little of both with egg and a touch of water, making a pale, warm milk of color. In the language of his shop, this is the first light. He loads a narrow brush and tests it at the panel's edge where border red will later live. He begins on the forehead, where light tends to visit first, thin strokes, each like a thread, laid in the direction a hand might smooth skin, across the brow ridge, down the bridge of the nose, on the cheekbones, along the top of the chin, over the neck's high places. He leaves the hollows green. The face does not change all at once, it blooms like dawn, layer upon layer. The apprentice watches how the brush, almost dry, makes soft meshes hatching, laid one way, then another like fine cloth. A second mixture, a little richer, more white, more ochre. He lays this within the first, stepping inward, smaller and brighter. Now the eyelids gather a faint light. The nose finds a thin line along its ridge. The lips receive a soft warmth, not red but a kinder brown, touched with a memory of cinnabar. The lower lip catches a tiny crescent. Under the eyes, a pale veil curves to suggest the glow beneath. The green still shows at the edges. It is not a mistake in this manner of painting. Coolness teaches warmth where to sit. He pauses to explain, not with many words, but with a simple sentence the apprentice has heard before. Light is added, not invented. He shows how the first lights are broad and low, the next smaller and higher, each one a step toward a final whisper that will be almost white. The boy nods and grinds, more white, slow and even. Stones circling show with a soft, sandy murmur. The robe waits in blue. Yesterday's azurite has dried to a chalky sky. Egg tempera likes to be coaxed. He mixes a fresh batch azurite and a grain's weight of black to cool it and lays another thin coat, steady within his penciled border, leaving a breathing line of gesso against the gold. When that dries quicker than oil would, he returns with the comb-like badger brush and smooths the green to a suede evenness. He adds shadow under the fold and rises from the shoulder, under the elbow's valley, along the side where the body turns away from the room. These shadows are not heavy, they are simply places where air is thicker. With a finer brush and a darker blue he draws the fold lines, hatching them in pairs where cloth would creases on itself. The apprentice brings a yardstick straight. With a lip hand the painter lays it to guide a red border round the panel's edge. The red is minium, warm as brick, egg-bound and calm. Two lines run around the icon, close as companions, true to the wood's geometry. Between them, with a round-tipped stick, he places a procession of white dots. From arm's length, they will read as tiny beads set in the border, quiet ornament for a quiet frame. He returns to the face, a third light, now milkier. His hand is slower. The places grow smaller, corner of the brow, turn of the nostril, tip of the chin, notch above the upper lip, to tiny strokes in the inner corner of each eye, where the tear sits when it thinks. The face turns from mask to attention. He does not strive for likeness of any person he has known. He aims for the calm type his teachers taught him, the still human that carries more than one story. This restraint is not coldness, it is a way of leaving room. At the throat he lays a small shadow under the jaw, then a thread of light along the Adam's apple. The hand that blesses receives its first lights on knuckle hills and fingernail moons. Joints are marked with small almond shapes, green holding to the sides, lights easing up the middle. The palm is warmed with a thin wash of earth, then crossed with 3 faint lines that will not be read, only felt. He mixes cinnabar with a breath of white and the smallest touch of ochre, then tests a diluted wash on the cheek. It is just enough to suggest blood under skin. Over it, he returns with the previous light to keep the cheek from shouting. In this work, if a color grows bold, it is tamed not by scolding but by laying patience over it. The gold wants one more kindness. With the thinnest brush he draws a hairline round the halo where it meets the blue-brown, not black so the metal will feel set, not floating. Then, using a reed pen and thin brown paint, he writes small letters at the top corners that will later be strengthened in red, abbreviations known to his city, names that mark the holy as you mark a door. He pricks guideline dots with a needle so the letters sit even, turning each stroke with breath at the end to keep edges soft. The apprentice sets 2 cups on the table, warm water, and a scrap of bread with olives. They eat in working silence, bread pulled by thumb and first finger or traced on crumb with a corner of fruit. The painter wipes his hands on a linen rag, then on his robe's inner hem, a habit he tells the boy not to learn and which the boy will learn anyway. Before he returns to the panel, he sharpens a goose quill with a small knife. The blade's edge whispers through hollow shaft. He tests the nib on a shard of gesso-coated wood, drawing lines that grow from hair to thread with pressure. The quill will be for inscriptions and for the fine patterning that sits on garments in quiet rooms, little ladders, and nets that catch light. He checks the face again from a step back. The green still hums in the hollows. Light sits softly. The mouth does not smile, but neither does it refuse you. Good. He mixes the 4th light, mostly white now, and sets the tiniest touches. A point at the bridge of the nose, a grain on the lower lip's curve, pinhead glints at the tops of fingers, the rim of the eyelid's arch. These are not sparkles, they are places where breath pauses. By the window, a pigeon lands and mutters to itself. A neighbor's bucket rope creaks at a well. The brazier settles with a sigh. He lays the brush down and lets the panel rest. Egg and earth enjoy being left alone as much as they enjoy being used. The light has climbed the wall and settled in the high corner like a perched bird. The panel rests on 2 sticks so air can pass beneath. Paint appreciates a small breeze. The painter rubs his fingertips together to feel for dust, then wipes them on the linen rag folded thrice. He leans close again, patient as water. Garments come first today. The blue robe has dried to a calm sky. The undershadows have told it where to fold. He mixes a deeper tone azurite with a touch more black, and the smallest drop of brown. With a long, soft brush he lays narrow hatchings along the shadow side of each pleat, lines close together, then a little apart, then close again like breathing. Where two folds meet, he crosses the hatching lightly, so cloth feels layered rather than cut. The strokes follow the imagined weight of wool, down from shoulder to elbow, from elbow to wrist. He pauses to look from arm's length. The robe is still quiet. Good. Pattern should help the eye, not lead it by the nose. He prepares a lighter blue for the upper ridges azurite with a pearl of white. These he hatches in the opposite direction, rising up the foal's crest, strokes short and even, almost dry. The robe finds a slow shimmer where light would walk. Between light and shadow he leaves a small seam of the middle blue, so the eye can rest. Egg temper rewards this kind of restraint. Little is lost, much is hinted. On the table, a tiny shell holds shell gold, ground leaf mixed with a breath of honey and washed of sweetness, then kept with gum to ask it to be paid. He wets it with a drop of water, stirring until it turns to quiet liquid metal. This is for assists the fine gold threads that live along a foal's highest thought, or the turn of a hem where holiness is suggested by brightness, not by trumpet. He tests the brush point on a scrap, then lifts the panel to the window's better light. With his wrist steadied on a padded rest, he runs the gold line where the robe rises most, a tender arc from collar to shoulder, a short flick across the chest, a brief stroke along the forearm. The lines are thin as hair, not a fence, only a breath. When they dry, they will catch lamp glow in a room where someone keeps vigil. That is their work. He turns to the Hammation, the outer mantle mixed from red earth and a little madder, cooled with black. It has waited until the blue could answer. He lays the broad color into passes, then gathers its folds with darker hatching, letting corners soften where cloth would sag. On edges and hems he paints a narrow ornamental band, first a line of minion, then inside it a chain of tiny lozenges in white, measured with the tip of a reed. At this period, he explains to the apprentice, patterning on garments is not fashion but memory, a way of recalling a woven border in a painted world. The boy nods and counts the lozenges under his breath, not to rive, only to keep even time. Hair waits in brown earth. He mixes umber with a small sip of black, binds it with egg, and lays the mass with a flat brush, the main shape first, not looking for hairs, only for the quiet heel the hairs belong to. When it dries to velvet, he adds warmth, earth yellow, and a little red in thin strokes that follow the curve of growth, temple to nape, crown to shoulder. He leaves darker seams where locks would meet. Last, with a brush touch to shell gold, he lifts 3 or 4 slim lights at the temples and across a curl that bends to the ear. They are not loud. They are the way sun remembers hair. The eyes receive their second attention. He darkens the upper lid's line a little brown, never black, and sets a finer one for the lower, broken at the center so the wetness can breathe. The iris remains quiet, more brown than bright. A mustard fleck at the lower edge suggests life without sparkle. A dot that might become a highlight is refused. This face prefers composure. He softens the inner corners with a warm glaze, as if blood simply lives there. Hands are careful work. He smooths a thin veil of warm earth over the green and first lights laid before, then returns with small ladders of white tucker hatching up each finger. Knuckles gain tiny oval lights. The nails receive pale crescents at their moons, then a breath of shadow where they meet skin. The thumb pad glows with a wider stroke to suggest softness. He turns the wrist with a single shadow under the sleeve. Veins are not drawn, a cold glaze hints at them, and leaves the rest to kindness. From time to time he closes his own hand and opens it again, feeling where bones rise. Painting in this workshop is partly memory of touch. He starts border ornaments while the garments rest. The two red rules are dry. Between them he paints a quiet meander, small right-angle turns that walk along the frame like a thoughtful river. He keeps it faint, a stone path under grass. At the panel's outer edge he plants for circles with a compass and fills them with tiny crosses in white. They will sit at the corners like rivets, making the painted world feel built. Inscriptions return. He sets the panel upright and, with the sharpened quill, redraws his guide dots where charcoal had faded. He mixes a calm red cinnabar tamed with a little white and writes the customary abbreviations his city knows, small as a thumbnail, above the shoulders. The quill's nib kisses and lifts, each stroke ending in a soft tail where pressure eases. He wipes the nib often on a folded rag so the letters do not flood. On the lower border he adds a line in brown, a date by indiction, a scribe's note that will mean more to a clerk than to a pilgrim. In this period, words are not signatures of pride, they are labels of service. He rests his hand and lets the apprentice try a letter on a gesso shard. The boy's first line blots, the second sits upright. The painter smiles at the improvement and turns the shard over so tomorrow will also have room for practice. Back to the face, he prepares the fifth light, mostly white, carried on a brush nearly dry. Faint touches now, no longer lines, but points, two on each brow, one at the nose's tip, one on the lower lip, one where the cheek's light would be the last to leave at dusk. He taps each, not drags. The face deepens without growing louder. This way of building from green to gold warm light may seem contrary to later habits, he notes gently, but here the path runs from stillness toward presence, never the other way. A few gold assists go into the hair, and on the mantle's border short ticks that do not pretend to be thread, just reminders of care. He breathes on the shell gold to keep it willing. The room holds its breath with him. When he exhales smiles, the boy smiles too, though he does not quite know why. The painter shifts to the halo again. With a very fine brush he paints a line of transparent brown along the inner rim where the head meets the light, then feathers it into the hair with a finger. The gold steps back by the width of a whisper, the head steps forward. Space is created without pushing. He stands and stretches his back. The small brazier gets a nudge, and Nicole slides to a warmer seat. He rinses brushes, pinches their points, and lays them flat on a clean cloth so hairs will sleep aligned. He pulls the gauze cover over the panel against dust and folds the linen partly back so air can move. The apprentice covers the shells and sets the quill in a clay stand with its point upward, like a reed by a river. They listen. In the alley beyond, a donkey's hoof finds a hollow in the stone and learns it. In the next room, a page turns again, a kettle remembers it was warm, and sighs. Work that is meant to last appreciates being unhurried. Midday light has thinned to a soft wash. The panel breathes under its gauze cover like a sleeping bird. When the cloth lifts, the gold seems calmer, as if it has finished speaking and is ready to listen again. Today the painter tends to quiet luxuries, ornaments that sit close to the body, and small geometry that tells the eye where it stands. He begins with the garment borders. The mantle's red edge already holds a fine line and a chain of tiny lozenges. Now he places pearls along the collar, small dots of thick white, each the size of a poppy seed, set with the spacing taught by his master's master. He turns the panel a little so the brush can approach without strain. Dot, breathe, lift. Dot, breathe, lift. Once dry, each bead receives a grain of shell gold at its upper left edge, the briefest crescent. From a distance the color will carry a hush of light, not a ring of noise. He mixes a brown gold wash ochre, a sigh of red, and a brush tip of shell gold and drags it very thinly along ends and the inside of a fold, a glaze that warms without drawing attention. This is not gilding, it is hospitality for cloth. The apprentice watches the angle of the brush and how little liquid sits in its belly. Temper forgives almost everything except impatience. On the table, a small stack of punches lies in order. He chooses the flower head with 5 petals, taps it in a sparse rhythm along the halo's outer ring, leaving little blossoms that no one will count but everyone will feel. Between them, he returns to the dot punch and sets pairs of points, like footsteps beside a road. He knows when to stop. Ornament must never chase the face from the room. Now for the space around the figure. Many icons of his time keep an unbroken gold ground, but sometimes a low wall or a stylized building appears, not as scenery, but as a sign of place. He pricks to guide points with a needle and draws, with diluted brown, the simplest of architectures, a pale, stepped platform to the left, and behind it a small, abstracted doorway suggested by 2 upright strokes and a lintel that leans a little, the way roofs in old cities do. The lines are thin as threads. He lightens the side toward the gold with a veil of white, darkens the opposite with a wash of brown. It reads like a memory more than a structure, enough to let the viewer's mind rest its back against something. The seat under the figure becomes a cushion of color rather than a throne. 2 rectangles, one of dull green, one of earthen red, separated by a hairline of white. He cross-hatches their near edges so they sit on the ground rather than float. A narrow shadow falls onto the gold under the cushion's front, a faint brown feathered with a finger until it becomes simply a gentler gold. He steps back and squints. The figure now inhabits the panel without being trapped by it. He returns to the flesh. 4 lights have climbed the face, the last will be almost nothing, a breath of lead-white tinged with the tiniest snow of yellow earth. He dries the brush on the cloth until it is nearly forgetful of paint, then touches the brow ridge with 3 pinpoints, the very tip of the nose with 1, the cupid's bow with a grain, the cheek's highest round with another that is hardly there. On each finger a note of brightness stands at the nail's rim. These are called spark touches in the shop speech, though no flame lives in them, only steadiness. The face turns fully toward attention, without losing its gentleness. Hair receives a second kindness. Thin lines of warm yellow earth laid along earlier strokes, like sun coming through shutters. The beard, if there is one, gets tiny squares of light along the chin where hairs catch in groups. Around the ear, he darkens the hollow slightly to return it to the head's curve. He softens the join between hair and forehead with a coal glaze, so no hard border scolds the eye. The apprentice sets out the reed pen again, and the painter tests it on a gesso shard. Satisfied, he strengthens the upper corner abbreviations in calm red, then adds 2 tiny crosses in white at their ends. On the lower border he writes a brief dedication in brown, a prayer of N for his mother, the N, to be filled when the patron's name is brought by the clerk. He spaces the words as though placing seeds in a garden room between rumora. A small geometry lesson appears on the garment. Over the blue, he lays an almost invisible lattice in pale gray, repeating a motif from woven cloth, a net of inch-long lines that break near folds and rejoin. Never perfect. Where the lattice crosses light, he leaves gaps so the shimmer can speak. The apprentice asks, "Why paint a weave when we already paint folds?" The painter answers softly, "Because hands remember thready, even when eyes don't." He turns to the halo one last time and sets 3 short, vertical incised strokes at its very top, spaced like breath. Some households keep this habit, 3 as a sign of sanctity's grammar. He does not insist on it as law. He adds it here because the panel asks for a small sobriety. Now comes a moment of restraint that feels like generosity. He lays a wash of the faintest warm gray around the figure's outline, just on the gold, barely there. It is not a shadow. It is a cushion of air, the thinnest separation so the body will not seem glued to the light. When it dries, the effect will vanish into clarity, the best kind of work. Sealing will not happen today. Tempera wants more than a single sun. But he prepares. He picks stray fibers from the surface with the tip of a knife. He looks along the panel at eye level, letting raking light show any raised dust. A soft feather does small work where needed. He shows the apprentice the varnish jar resin dissolved and guarded from dust to be used in weeks, not hours. In this city some use oil carefully thickened and warmed, others a resinous spirit. In this house they bless patience first and choose resin later. Either way, the goal is the same, a thin skin that keeps breath and touch from drinking the paint, and that lends the gold a quiet depth like honey seen through glass. He sketches in air the steps to come, sun and shade turning the panel each day, the first thin varnish brushed and then breathe upon to level, the waiting. A second whisper of varnish months later if the patron can bear to wait, and perhaps a fabric cover on hinges, so hands must ask permission before eyes enter. He lifts the panel carefully and sets it upright on the easel to meet the rune. From a few paces, the figure returns the gaze without judgment. The halo's tooling speaks in murmurs, the garments breathe, the border holds like a frame of quiet hands. He and the apprentice stand a minute without words. Even the brazier seems to listen. He lowers the cover again to keep dust from inventing itself. Brushes are washed in warm water and soap, rinsed, pinched to points, and set flat on a clean board. Shells are topped with drops of water, gilding tools wrapped in their cloth, punch tips wiped with a touch of oil to keep them from tarnish. The room returns to order as the day leans toward evening. From the alley comes a cart's rubbered silence, fresh straw, perhaps, or clean sacks. Overhead, a pigeon decides that roof tile is preferable to air and lands like a dropped question. The painter taps the tabletop once with 2 fingers, a habit that means enough in this place. He smiles at the apprentice. Tomorrow, we let it look back at us again. The boy nods, gathers the rags, and drapes a clean linen over the bench. The panel waits, radiant but modest, as if it prefers to be found rather than shown. Morning returns with a gentler hand. The gauze cover lifts, and the panel looks rested, as if sleep had smoothed its thoughts. The painter sets it upright on the easel and lets a ribbon of raking light cross the surface. Gold answers first, then blues and reds, then the small, quiet whites. Final work begins with looking. He walks the panel from left to right, top to bottom, like reading a familiar page. Where a robe's edge touches gold, he finds a thread of paint that crept too far. He does not scold it. He picks up a dry point, just a polished needle set in wood, and draws the line back to where it belongs, lifting a whisper of color. A soft brush carries the crumb away. On the halo's inner rim he corrects one wobble with a single, careful arc, making roundness true again. Dry point is not noise, it is tidy breath. He warms a little egg and water with his palm and mixes a veil of warm earth for the cheeks, so green and light, merry without edge. Over the throat he lays a cooler glaze, thin as air, to help the head stand from the neck with kindness. In the blue robe he washes a darker tone into two folds near the elbow, so they speak to each other from shadow to shadow. The brush is nearly dry. A second pass is only the suggestion of a second pass. Temper rewards restraint. Shell gold returns for a brief visit. Overnight, tiny tool marks and a sleeve's accidental touch have dulled a few threads. He roots the shell and coaxes a hairline along the collar's highest thought, taps to points on a fold that holds like a cupped hand, and leaves the rest to time. He breathes gently across the leaf while it is still damp. The surface settles like water after a pebble. A clerk arrives with a folded paper. It carries the patron's small request, written in quick hand, and the mother's name, as promised. The painter opens the lower border where he left space. With the sharpened quill and a red tempered to calm, he writes the line in letters that neither crowd nor shy away. He dots the ends with white to keep the row from running off the board. The ink dries in moments. Egg remembers to be ready for that. He inspects nails and knuckles, adding one grain of pale to the ring finger, then softening it with a fingertip so the shine does not announce itself. In the eye, he lays the faintest warm line at the lower lid's edge and eases it away with a damp brush so there is moisture without sparkle. Hair receives two short strokes near the part, and the beard, if present, gains a small square of light where jaw and lips speak quietly. The apprentice holds the panel at a slant while the painter peers along the surface. Tiny fibers show themselves when light is low. He touches them away with the tip of a knife and a breath. A feather ruffles across the gold to ask dust to leave. The apprentice smiles when the feathers. Whisper sounds like a page turning. Ceiling waits until the hour when light is steady and the room has no hurry. He opens a jar kept at the back of the shelf, a thin, clear varnish made from resin kissed by oil, rested long and strained through linen. He does not stir it now. He rocks it once to wake it kindly. He tests a drop on a shard. It runs, then sits, leaving a quiet shine. Good. He breathes on the panel, not for warmth, but to feel the move of air. Then, with a broad, soft brush, he lays the varnish in lanes as narrow as his palm. Down, 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 never back and forth, so bubbles will not learn the road. Where a bee gathers at the lane's foot, he lifts it with the brush's thirsty heel. Over the gold he is light as falling ash. Over colors he is steady. A few tiny bubbles appear and then forget themselves. He leans close and breathes across the wet skin. It levels, the way a pond comes after a fish turns. They set the panel on supports so air can travel under it. The window opens the width of 2 fingers. Sun does not strike, only light does. The room smells faintly of resin, soft and clean, like worn pine. They leave it alone. The apprentice wipes the brush with oil, then soap and warm water, until the bristles remember their point. He lays the brush flat so its memory will remain straight. While it cures, they prepare the panel for travel. A sheet of clean linen, hemmed yesterday, becomes a sleeve that ties with cotton tape at the back. For small pads of wool wrap the corners beneath the cloth, so edges will not learn dents from a strap. The back receives a simple cross-strake of thin wood fixed with pegs, not nails, to keep the board modestly straight as seasons breathe. Two small rings are set at the top of the back with wooden pins, ready to accept a cord in the chapel if need asks it. A narrow leather strap will make the day's carrying easier. The apprentice tests the buckle twice. When the varnish feels like the skin of cooled honey, no longer tacky, not yet hard, they draw the sleeve up and tie the tapes. The painter adds a small postcard-sized veil over the face area inside, a habit he learned from a careful man long gone. It keeps the cloth from finding new meaning in gold. They step into the street. The panel rides against the painter's back, high and secure. The apprentice walks ahead to ask corners for space. Stone underfoot remembers many feet. Someone bakes bread, the air repeats the news. A donkey decides to stand and then decides again to walk. Two women speak of water, a cobbler's awl clicks like an insect. The painter keeps his breath even, the way he keeps a brush even. He does not hurry. Paint respects walking that understands weight. At the chapel, a small door opens from shade. Inside, the air is cool and friendly. A candle works at its wick in a red glass cup. The keeper, apron tied, nods a welcome and makes a place ready near the north wall. The panel sleeve unknots and lifts, linen whispers. Gold opens its eye and finds new light. It does not shout. It simply receives. They set it on a stand and check the straightness with ordinary eyes. A thin cord finds the back rings and a peg in the wall. The painter presses on the lower edge, gentle, testing for rock. There is none. The apprentice steps back until the figure sits with the candle and the small window in one conversation. The keeper brings a pot of incense and warms a coal with tongs. The smoke rises like a patient river. He wafts it before the panel, not as ceremony for spectacle, but as hospitality. Resin meets resin. The room smells like old wood and clean breath. A short blessing is spoken, few words, more pauses. The painter does not require thanks. He receives it and lets it pass through. He checks once more a border corner where red meets red and finds it fine. He lifts a stray thread from the floor and puts it in his pocket without thinking. Habit cares in small ways. They draw the curtain that lives on a brass rod above the panel, a simple linen fall that protects from dust, smoke, and vigorous hands. It lowers to just above the border so air can still walk. The keeper ties it with a narrow braid and smiles. It will teach stillness, he says. The painter nods. It will be taught by it, he replies, meaning himself as much as anyone. Back in the street, the strap hangs like now. The apprentice looks taller in the way of someone who has carried something between rooms of the world. They return to the workshop by a different alley, so the panel's absence can become the room's new shape. The bench clears. Shells go back in the box. The feather returns to its peg. The gilder's cushion sleeps. On the easel, an empty board waits under its first gesso coat, pale as a cloud before sun. Tomorrow will have the same tools, the same breaths, the same patience. From gold that learned to listen to breath, we will step into a high forest where ropes and smoke keep bees calm and honeykind. Morning finds a tiled courtyard the color of pale dates. A narrow channel of water, fed by a quiet canet, crosses from shade to sun and whispers against terracotta edges. Pigeons practice soft compliments under the eaves. In the long room beside the courtyard, a vertical loom stands like a doorway to another season. Warp threads hang in orderly columns, white as unbaked bread. A rolled cartoon inked and gridded rests on a low bench, its corners weighted by smooth stones. The workshop wakes without hurry. A kettle rides a brazier in the corner, steam lifting in a thin, slow ribbon. The master arrives first. His robe is simple, sleeves tied back with a twist of string. He runs a hand down the warp to feel its temper. Cotton today, cool, firm, obedient. Tension is good, but the left edge asks for one more turn of the wedge. He taps it in with a wooden mallet. The loom answers with a small, friendly knock that feels like a nod. Bundles of wool hang from pegs in the wall: pomegranate red, indigo blue, vine leaf green, walnut brown, undyed cream, and a yellow with a hint of quince. Each hank smells faintly of its bath: madder's earth, indigo's cool river, walnut's shell. Their twist is even. When squeezed, they spring back like polite breath. A length of red comes down, looped loosely over a peg near the working line. A young hand lays the skeins in order of the day's plan, counting under the breath in the old habit 1, 2, 2, 4, because sometimes patterns ask for pairs rather than singles. The cartoon unrolls to the row they will build. Small squares form a grid. Within them, the drawing shows stems, petals, and a narrow border of pearls. Notes in the margin, tiny Persian script and color marks, speak to the weaver like a quiet teacher. The master touches a blossom with the tip of a finger. This rose grows today, he says, not to command, only to invite the room to agree. He threads his knife onto a cord at his waist. The blade is short, quick, and used to being kind. Beside it hangs a metal comb beater, teeth close and straight, its back polished by decades of hands. Shears sleep on a folded cloth. A small clay cup holds chalk, and a reed tube keeps spare weft safe from dust. Everything has a home and knows the way back. The apprentices arrive with the day's light. One brings a tray of tea in narrow glasses, a sweetness to warm the morning. Another carries a basket of weft balls, fine, firm spins of undyed cotton for the ground between rows of knots. They greet the loom with the same small bow they would give an elder. Floors are covered with reed mats. Cushions wait like tame clouds along the weaving bench. They sit, tucking their feet beneath them, bodies settling into the measured kindness of work. A counted thread is marked at the selvage with a faint chalk tick. The master lifts a few warps aside with his fingers to make a window. He chooses a strand of red, holds it doubled in his left hand, and ties the first knot. It is the asymmetric knot taught in this town. The wool goes behind 2 warps, crosses the first, and returns to peep between them. He tightens it with a gentle tug, the way you close a careful mouth. The tuft stands neat and small. He trims it with a flick of the knife, no drama, just a breath shorter than its neighbor will be. Then he ties another and another, counting the cartoon's little squares, hearing the quiet arithmetic, 3 red, 1 cream, 3 red, a point of blue. An apprentice mirrors into hands with the way. Knots bloom along the row like seeds that always knew which way to turn. The weft comes after a breath. A thin strand passes behind the forest of warps, left to right. Another returns, right to left, crossing the first. The master lifts the beater and lets it fall with a soft, satisfying thud that settles wool and weft into agreement. The sound is the workshop's heart, not loud, not shy, steady as walking. As the line climbs, the rose's curve appears. At first it is only a suggestion, then a certain thing. Red deepens into shadow with a few knots of madder mixed with walnut. Light comes forward with a stitch of cream at the petal's edge. The green stem to the side leans by the width of a single warp, a tilt that feels like wind. The master pauses now and then to smooth the pile with his palm, not to change anything, only to greet it. A boy on the small stool reads the cartoon in a whisper, not the words, but the count, 7 red, 1 cream, 3 red to blue. His voice helps hands keep measure. This may seem fussy to those who rush, but here the chant is as useful as the calm. In workshops like this, time does not hurry. It melts. A garden does not grow by command, it grows by a rhythm both firm and kind. Tea arrives, poured low to keep froth quiet. Glass warms the fingers. The master cools his by touching the warp. Cotton gives back a touch like water not yet convinced to boil. A sugared almond passes hand to hand. Someone remarks, very softly, that the indigo pot last week had the best temper after rain. No one argues. They have all met indigo on many mornings and found that it remembers weather as well as it remembers leaves. The room's other sounds keep close company. A sparrow under the eaves, the brush of wool against wool, the small scrape of knife on leather when its edge asks to be reminded, the distant rattle of a seller's tray in the lane, the silver click of a metal weight as an apprentice checks the warp's left border for true. When the row is finished, the master takes the shears and kisses the new pile with their lips. Snip, snip, snip only where a tuft forgets its neighbor's modesty. He saves the clippings in a small bowl. Later, they will be mixed with starch for patching a low place or used to test a dye bath without risking a full hank. Nothing in this room is useless. Everything waits patiently for its second name. A gentle side note leans into the hour. In many towns, families weave at home, in others, workshops keep the larger looms and the heavier patterns. Here, the room belongs to a guild that mines both oath and pride. Designs travel on paper and in memory. A boarder from one house enters the ground of another and becomes a cousin. This is not theft, it is conversation. The master's finger returns to the cartoon's margin where a tiny script says vine repeats every 12 knots. He smiles, as if reading a poem that still knows how to surprise. The day's first shadow crosses the floor when the sun steps behind the mulberry in the courtyard. The weavers lean their backs, roll shoulders once, and then find the line again. Hands do not stiffen here. They learn to be soft while they work. Wool speaks better to soft. At the end of the bench, a young apprentice winds small butterflies of color, short twists of wool wound on the fingers, then tucked. He arranges them in a shallow tray by shade, not by name, because fingers see difference more quickly than ears. He discards nothing larger than a thumb, Those bits will color leaf's hinge or the tiny nails on a nightingale's foot where it perches in a bough no bigger than 2 knots across. Late in the morning the master raises the shed slightly with a slender rod and checks the warp spacing. He notices a slight drift where eagerness pulled the knot a little too tight. He softens it with a thumb, adds 1 breath more weft in the next turn to invite the line back. The correction is so small that only the loom and the day will remember it. By noon the rose's outer petals have met themselves, and the first leaf rests beneath like a polite hand. A border pearl has begun a necklace of tiny cream dots, each a single knot with a quiet shadow made by trimming 1 breath shorter on the side away from the light. The beater lays a final thud, and the master lets the wool sigh. He brushes the face of the carpet with the back of his fingers. It feels like moss that has learned to be warm. Lunch will be bread, cheese, herb leaves rolled in thin flatbread, and a few olives, the taste of sun held in stone. Water from the courtyard channel will be lifted in a copper ladle and poured into clay cups. Conversation will remain small, dialogues, weather, and the rumor that a merchant wants a field of cypress trees in his next commission, each trunk the width of a song. The loom waits, ready to become afternoon. The courtyard's shade moves a hand's width. Someone sets 3 small dye pots near the brazier so their breath can join the day. They are not for great batches, those live in the dyer's quarter, but for little helps and quiet corrections. In one, indigo liquor rests like dusk. In another, a madder bath leans toward brick. In the third, a walnut shell brew holds the color of dry earth after rain. A boy tests heat with a finger on the pot's shoulder, not the lip, then adds a splash of water from the copper ladle. None of this will be forced. Colors prefer patience. Inside, the loom listens while fresh weft is twisted. An apprentice sits cross-legged with a hank of cotton over the toe of 1 foot. He draws a slender thread, twists it along his thigh with the flat of his palm, then winds the new weft into a small ball that fits in the space between finger and thumb. He sets each finished ball in a shallow basket lined with an old cartoon scrap, grid faint like afternoon memory. The basket keeps them from learning dust. The master checks the selvage cords. On each edge the stout warps are wrapped with extra weft as the work rises. This teaches the border to be straight and kind. He pinches the left selvage, hums a note, and pinches the right to hear if they agree. They do. He props the cartoon again to today's line with 2 all points and a smooth stone. A leaf, a pearl, and a small empty space wait for their names. Knots begin in a murmur. Red, cream blue. Asymmetric knots tuck themselves around their chosen warps and sit down. After a row, the weft passes left to right to left, then the comb beater lowers with its soft, convincing thud. Wool settles as if exhaling. Hours in this room are measured by that sound more than by the sun. At the brazier an apprentice brings a tuft that misremembered its shade. The master snips a pinch, dips it for a breath into the walnut bath, and presses it between cloths. He warms it near the brazier until steam is only a thought, then twists it into a butterfly and hands it back. For the shadow under the rose, he says. The correction is not an apology. It is a conversation between today and yesterday. A small bird waits in the cartoon's margin, drawn with 4 strokes and a dot. The master touches it with a knuckle. Later, he says, but we will give it a place. He points to a curve of leaves where the stem makes a tiny cradle. The apprentices follow his finger and nod. They do not rush toward the bird. Borders must rise true so the field can be trusted. By mid-morning the pearl border grows its quiet necklace. Each dot is one cream knot, trimmed a breath shorter on the side away from imagined light, then kissed once by the shears. Between pearls a ground of soft tan asks for calm hands. It shows every eagerness and forgives little. The master lays a thin veil of dust chalk breathed from the palm on the tan and brushes it off so his eyes can judge evenness. It vanishes like a thought that was not needed. Outside, dye pots share their whisper. The indigo liquor is not boiled. It is a living bath and does not enjoy shouting. The boy lifts a trial tuft on a reed stick, green at first, then blue as air acquaints itself with leaf. He rinses it in the channel and sets it on a brick to think. The madder pot receives a few test threads, creams that will become faint blush for the underside of pebbles. The walnut bath darkens a handful of pile clippings to show how shadows may behave near the nightingale when its time arrives. Back at the loom, a narrow guard stripe climbs beside the pearls, 2 knots of walnut brown, 1 of cream, 2 of brown again, repeated until patience looks like skill. Guard stripes keep the eye tidy. They are the low walls a garden uses to remember itself. An apprentice counts them with just audible numbers. The master listens for the count as much as for the thud of the beater. Numbers and sounds hold the shape of a day. Weft balls lighten. The boy twists more, laying them by shade in the little basket bone-white wheat, a touch of smoke. When one ball falls from his hand and rolls under the bench, he does not chase it. He reaches for the spare with the same quiet his elders use at the loom. Nothing urgent is allowed to be edged here. A side note, gentle and brief, many looms in this century tie a different knot, the symmetrical one taught farther west. In this room the asymmetric knot is law, wrapping one warp and peeking between both. It makes a face that lies down smooth when trimmed. Knots are like alphabets. More than one can spell the same word. The master slides a slender rod behind a run of warps to raise a little window for weft. He seats the rod and runs a finger along the warp's teeth, feeling for even spacing. At one place a warp leans toward a neighbor. He coaxes it back with a narrow spacer and a rub. Cotton accepts instruction. He strokes the pile below, then above, reading the surface the way some read weather. Tea returns, and with it a plate of sesame bread. Hands pause without losing the page they are on. Someone says the indigo pot smells like figs today. Someone else says figs do not smell like that, and both smile without moving their eyes from the cartoon. The master dips his bread into salt and sets a piece by the cartoon's corner as if feeding a guest. Superstition is not what is happening, it is hospitality to attention. Afternoon leans forward. The border has climbed enough that the field can begin to open again. In the space where leaf will cradle bird, the master lays 3 knots of soft tan for air, then a touch of pale green for the stem that will be behind the bird's leg. He ties 2 tiny black knots for the future and hides them under shallow veil of cream so they will wait without shouting. The bird will be no larger than a thumb, but it will ask to be treated like a guest, not a picture. At the brazier the boy brings in the little tufts. The indigo is deep enough for a feather line. The madder makes a pink that is nearly skin, The walnut yields a good, honest shadow. The master presses each tuft to the cartoon, where the grid tells him the count. He chooses for blues, one for feather, one for feather's edge, one for the thought of sky between feathers, and one that will not be used today. He puts the fourth back in the dish. Restraint is also color. Weft moves again. The comb beater settles the afternoon into place. The nightingales perch to diagonal knots of brown. One of cream leans by intention so the bird will look as if it knows wind. The master ties the first feather. A blue knot leaned left, then another leaned right, the way the asymmetric knot can be persuaded to pretend the curl of real plumage. He trims the pair a hair shorter and smooths with the base of his thumb. A suggestion appears, and then pretends to have always been there. He stops and lifts his hand away. Enough for the bird today, he says. Let it arrive slowly. He points instead to the pearl border. We carry this to the corner. Apprentices take the cue. Green dots continue their necklace. Walnut stripes keep watch. The field rests and waits. Shadows lengthen. The courtyard channel grows a deeper green. The kettle over the brazier has become quiet. The master ties off the weft at the selvage, tucks the tail, and checks the line. He smooths the pile one last time with the back of his fingers. It feels like a low cloud. On a scrap of birch bark paper, he notes the day's rise. Pearl to 24, guard strike to 22, leaf to rose begun, nightingale eye hidden. He tucks the slip under the cartoon like a bookmark. The loom stands still, but not stillness exactly. More like breathing in, waiting for the next breath. Morning returns with the soft scrape of reed brooms on the courtyard tiles. The channel's water is greener today, as if it remembered last night's moon. In the weaving room the loom waits, warp quiet, cartoon roll to the mark where yesterday's numbers went to sleep. The master lays out two tools that do not hurry, long-nosed shears with narrow blades, and a small wooden board polished into a mirror by wool. Before any knot is tied, the face receives a gentle shearing. Not a haircut, only a courtesy. The master rests the board against the pile and opens the shears so one blade kisses wood and the other glides over the tiny forest of wool. Snip, snip, snip small, even sounds that keep time with breath. Clippings collect like a low cloud on the board's edge. He moves across the rows and the tan ground, never biting too deep. A single high tuft is taught to be neighborly. A shy hollow is invited up with one less trend. The carpet skin becomes more itself soft, even and ready to keep secrets under light. An apprentice gathers the clippings in a clay bowl. They will live a second life testing small dye baths or filling a low place no one else will ever see. Today the medallion begins to tell its curve. On the cartoon it is a round form with scalloped edges, like a pole traced by wind. Curves are made from squares in this room. They arrive by steps. The master marks a few guide points on the warps with a whisper of chalk, counting according to the grid. 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, 1. He ties a thread between two pins as a shallow bow to show the arc. The thread is not a ruler. It is a suggestion. We will follow this thought, he says. Hands nod without speech. Knots answer the line. A necklace of cream knots becomes the medallion's outline, each set one breath shorter on the side away from imagined light so the curve will read soft. Inside, a blue field to indigos blended in the hand begins to swing. The master leans a few asymmetric knots left, a few right, So the blue looks like water that has learned to be still. Every 8 knots he pauses, pats the curve with his palm, and listens with his fingers. Where a corner risks becoming stubborn, he tucks 1 knot under the outline and trims it shy. Steps turn to bend. A circle is not forced. It is coaxed. Before the noon bell of the bathhouse down the lane can be heard, the loom asks for a repair. A single warp near the right border has grown tired, fuzzed by years in store, and now fretting under work. The master sees it the way a musician hears a sour note. He stops the room with a lifted hand. No sighs, only attention. Repair in this place is its own craft. He eases out to weft passes above the weak spot, lifting their tails with a bone pick so no fiber snags. He wedges a thin rod to hold the shed open. From a basket he takes a length of new cotton warp spun a hair finer than the old and waxes it with the lightest pass of beeswax so it will behave kindly. With a tiny needle he runs the new thread along the tired warp, paring them for a hand's breadth above and below the weak place. He ties a weaver's knot so small it looks like a pause in the thread, then coaxes the old warp to lie beside the new, neither proud, neither shy. He strokes the pair until they agree. Weft returns left to right, right to left, and the cone beater lays its soft sentence. The room breathes again. As if nothing happened, an apprentice whispers. Exactly so, the master answers. Thy pots outside make quiet help. The walnut bath has yielded a brown that looks like the inner side of bark. The indigo still smiles green as it rises and turns to evening band by band. For yellow today, they use wool saved in a tied cloth, steeped earlier until it spoke of straw and sun. The boy left 3 test tufts, 1 walnut dulled for shadow, 1 well bright for a blush, 1 indigo cooled with the smallest drop of tannin so it lies down beside cream without argument. Each tuft dries on a brick, edges curled like leaves deciding. Back at the loom, the nightingale receives more of itself, but not all at once. Yesterday left an eye waiting under cream. The master frees it with 2 precise snips. A black point appears, small as a seed. He lays the beak with a single walnut knot, and 1 cream beside it, lean so the beak seems to catch light. Feathers arrive by persuasion, a blue knot, then a bluer one, then a blue made smoky with walnut trimmed in a tiny slope to suggest the round of a body that could rest in a palm. For the breast he uses madder weakened with hot water, a blush that will live quietly under leaf. He stops before the bird completes itself. We leave it to dream, he says, and turns to the vine. Borders rise to meet corners. At each turn the pearl necklace must remember how to bow without breaking. The master lays out the corner on the cartoon with 3 grains of chalk and a breath. He ties a guiding thread at an angle across the warps, then places the first corner pearl where thread and instinct agree. To cream knots share a warp at the bend, trimmed to make a soft square look like a turn. The guards strike brown, cream brown follows with a tilt, then straightens. An apprentice presses the line with a thumb. It keeps its promise. There is a pause to twist new weft. Cotton sings on the thigh, a dry song you can feel more than hear. The balls roll into the shallow basket. The master checks one by pressing it between forefinger and thumb. It springs back. Good, he says, giving the word the size of a cup of tea. A side note lives here, brief and calm. Curs and medallions in this century often echo pools, gardens, or the round faces of dishes painted in cobalt. Some travelers say the shapes came from China with bowls, others say they flowered from the older Persian taste for gardens you can carry on a floor. In this room, explanation rests. The curve matters because the hand believes it. Work returns to wool. The blue of the medallion deepens, but not in one mood. The master pricks the cartoon where the center will later hold a small lantern form, a pale geometry nested like a thought inside water. He will not begin it today. A carpet is a promise stretched on wood. Promises enjoy patience. Noon visits and leaves. Bread cracks with a sound that suits the room. Cheese tastes of salt and morning. A few mint leaves travel in a folded flatbread and make a green that the eye can taste. Someone mentions a customer who asked yesterday whether the bird could be a peacock instead. The master smiles without looking up. A nightingale in a garden knows how to whisper. A peacock does not. Heads dip, not in respect alone, but in agreement with sleep. Afternoon cools. A breeze walks the corridor, bringing the smell of copper and soap from the bathhouse. The master trims the medallion's edge once more, careful as a barber before a wedding. He takes up the comb beater and gives the row a final thud that settles the day's talk into a single breath. He writes a small note on the slip under the cartoon. Curve to point 7, corner trained, bird's eye shown. Numbers and a memory. Before closing, he teaches a small repair to an apprentice who has watched long enough to try. On the edge, a warp end has made a small loop where it did not belong. The apprentice teases it back with a bone pick, rides it into the next shed, and tucks it with a tiny couching stitch of weft no wider than a hair. The master nods, not with praise, but with relief. The loom likes to be understood. Evening gathers. The warp is covered with a damp cloth that keeps dust from learning a habit. Wool butterflies are returned to their tray by shade. The dye pots are lifted from the brazier and set to cool under the eaves. The cartoon is rolled to the next line with 2 careful thumbs. The room exhales. The nightingale waits, half arrived. The medallion holds its small lake of blue. The pearl border knows where to turn. Tomorrow will bring the lantern at the medallion's heart, a few fruits on the vine, and a test of a new well bath that wants to be cheerful without shouting. Day enters the room through the high lattice as a soft pattern of light. The damp cloth lifts from the warp. Cotton wakes without complaint. The master runs to fingers along the selvage cords and hears with his skin that both sides still agree. The slip from yesterday weeks under the cartoon a small memory of numbers and notes. He reads it once, nods, and sets it aside. Today the medallion learns its pale lantern. On the cartoon a small geometry rests inside the blue diamond on diamond, a quiet star nested in a pool. The master marks 4 faint chalk points on the warps to name the lantern's corners. He ties a thin guide thread across 2 pegs, then another at a slight angle, so the center will not wander. We begin with breath colors, he says. Cream, a yellow touched by weld, and a tan that looks like wheat at noon. The hanks come down and settle on the bench like tame birds. Knots move in a slow music. To crane knots, 1 weld, 1 crane, then a tan. The asymmetric wrap leans left for the lantern's left edge, leans right for the other, making a line that feels drawn rather than built. Every few knots the master smooths the new face with the side of his thumb. The blue of the medallion receives this pale window as water might accept a pebble, small circles meeting and then forgetting the ripple. The weft passes left to right, right to left, and the comb beater lowers with that familiar, modest thud. Light settles into the blue and changes it from within. An apprentice trims the lantern line with long-nosed shears held like a pen. One breath shorter on the lower edge, a fraction longer on the side that imagines light. The lantern begins to glow without shining. In many carpets, a bright center would call for busy vines and quick flourishes. Here the center rests. Its job is to calm the room. Meanwhile, corners ask for their turn. The pearl border must meet itself and bowl without a crease. The master works at the lower right. He sets two pins and pulls a fine thread between them to offer a path. He lays one crane knot at the bend, then another that shares a warp with it. He trims both so they look like a single bead that learned to turn. The guard stripe follows brown, cream brown tilted at the corner, then straight again. An apprentice across the beam mirrors the work at the left. They count aloud in low voices so the turns will match. 5, 3, 1, 1, 3, 5. The numbers make a little bridge over the corner and carry the eye across. In the courtyard, a small bundle of reeds soaks in a trough. After the lantern's first ring is set, the master brings the bundle in, shakes the water, and ties it with a scrap of cotton. This tool is older than the room. He draws the damp reeds across the pile in long, even strokes, all in one direction. Wool lies down together and learns to face the same way. The lantern's surface becomes a brushed field, the blue around it a smooth lake. The reeds whisper as they walk the face. When the bundle dries, he dips the tip and continues, patient and quiet. A reed brush teaches sheen without heat or hurry. A gentle side note arrives while the reeds move. Many weavers polish with pumice or with a metal spoon for sharp shine. In this house they prefer reeds and palm. The light that rises is softer. It sits closer to wool's own voice and does not show off. Tea arrives with thin bread and a dish of dates. The apprentice on the stool reads the cartoons count in a whisper as the master eats. Lantern line 2, blue fill 5, lantern line 2. The room's sounds stay friendly, shears clicking small compliments, knife kissing leather for a breath, water in the channel saying yes to the shade. A visitor steps in from the lane. He is a merchant from the bazaar, known to the house. He removes his shoes at the threshold, leaves his mantle folded over his arm, and greets the loom as if it were a person. He carries a rolled strip of paper with measurements written in a careful hand and a purse that makes a low, serious sound. He does not speak quickly. The master invites him to sit on a reed mat at the side where the carpet's face can be seen without leaning on the frame. They look rather than talk. The merchant reaches out, not with his palm, but with the back of his fingers, the older way to test pile without pressing oil into wool. He draws his hand lightly along the border, across the lantern's edge, and then back over the blue. He nods, a small, satisfied motion. The master unrolls the remaining cartoon pages and shows the vine puffs that will travel above and below the medallion. He holds up to Hank's one matter, one of brown cooled with walnut, to ask how deep he is willing to let the vine shadows be. The merchant points to the quieter of the two. For our room, he says softly, people come to rest after heat. They speak of size. The paper holds a figure for length that is one hand longer than the loom's current plan. The master shows where a narrow panel can be added at the top and bottom without troubling the border's grammar. He notes the change on a scrap and tucks it under the cartoon. Payment waits for another day. The merchant leaves a small weight of silver as thanks for progress and a little bag of saffron as a courtesy to the kettle. Before he goes, he bends once more and runs the back of his fingers over the nightingale's place where only an eye and a few feathers exist. He smiles. "Let it come slowly," he says. The room understands. Work returns to wool. The lantern receives its second ring, a narrow lozenge of 10 that makes the cream seem brighter without shouting. Inside that, a single line of cream like a quiet path. At the very heart, two knots of welled yellow sit side by side, then one of cream between them. It is enough. The center knows to stay small. The master adds 3 blue knots around the lantern's lower edge, lean to suggest a shadow that light itself would cast. At the next bench, an apprentice gives the vine its first fruit, tiny pomegranates no wider than 2 knuckles. They are made with 3 knots of madder, 1 of walnut for the seam, and a crown of yellow each, a little well-star trimmed close. The fruit do not crowd each other. They hang with room for air, as in gardens where water is scarce, and each tree keeps its own shape. The nightingale earns another breath of itself. The master sets 2 knots of pale pink on its breast, then a single cream to show the turn under the throat. He lays a feather line on the wing with a slightly darker blue than yesterday. The beak receives 1 more walnut knot, and the suggestion of a curve achieved by trimming the lower edge a hair more than the upper. He stops again. The bird is still not whole, that is its grace. Outside, the dye pots cool under the eaves. The apprentice gathers the reed bundle, still damp at the tips, and gives the face a last, slow stroke from border to center. The lantern and medallion look like water holding the memory of a cloud. The guard stripes it. Quiet, pleased with their straightness. The corners show no hurry. Only the curve that belongs there. As afternoon leans away, the master lifts the comb beater and gives the day's last row a home. He ties off the weft at the selvage, tucks the tail with the bone pick, and presses the line with his thumb until it forgets to be a line. He writes a few words on the slip: lantern set, pearls turned, vine begun, patron pleased. The paper returns to its place below the cartoon. Will butterflies go back to their tray by shade? Shears nest on their folded cloth. The reed bundle, rinsed and squeezed, hangs by the window to dry in a shape that already remembers tomorrow. The damp cloth settles over the warp again, a simple roof against dust. The loom rests. The room's breath becomes the house's breath. Somewhere a cellar lists quints in the lane and a kettle sighs. The carpet keeps its quiet conversation with the day. Morning leans into the lattice with a pattern the carpet already understands. The damp cloth lifts, warp threads look back, calm and ready. On the bench, wool butterflies wait in their tray by shade. The slip beneath the cartoon reads yesterday's memory: lantern set, pearls turned, vine begun, patron pleased. The master taps the edge of the frame with 1 knuckle, a habit more blessing than test. Today is for finishing things that have been patient. The pearl border must meet itself along the upper rung. The vine needs a touch of shadow at its fruit, and the small bird, quiet for days, has asked to finish its arrival. The master sets 2 pins and offers the top border a guiding thread. Cream knots walk toward the corner in an even pace. Breath, Each trimmed a whisper shorter on the lower side so the necklace still looks round. The guard stripe follows brown, cream brown, turning as if it knew how to bow at birth. At the field, leaves learn their last silences. The apprentice lays a faint shadow with walnut cooled brown beside the pomegranates, just enough to let each fruit feel round without calling attention to the paint. A touch of weld sits on the crown, trimmed close so the yellow is a thought, not a shout. The vine itself receives a single line of cream along its upper edge, a suggestion of light. The comb beater comes down with its known, modest thud. Wool and weft agree to remember. The nightingale waits where the curve of leaves made a cradle. The master smooths yesterday's knots with the back of his thumb. He frees the hidden eye with two snips so small they sound like a breath. A blue knot, slightly darker than its neighbor, leans to say feather. A paler blue follows to say edge. He lays two knots of madder rose for the breast and softens the step with cream trimmed the size of a seed. For the back he mixes blue and walnut between his fingers, twisting them into a single butterfly. One knot of that mixed shade becomes depth, a little room behind the bird where air can sit. He stops, looks, and places one last knot, a single cream at the throat, lean to catch an imagined sun. The beak receives a tiny trim that makes a curve where no curve exists. The bird is no larger than a thumb. It feels complete without speaking loudly. Enough, the master says, the words small as a cup. The apprentices look and let their eyes rest. Now the top border and the side must meet with no crease, no hurry. The master sets the corner pearls, each a shared warp trimmed as one. He checks the count against the cartoon 5, 3, 1, 1, 3, 5 and listens for the soft arithmetic that has kept the room's pulse. The guard strike tilts and straightens. The vine rises to the edge and stops with good manners. The blue of the medallion holds its small lake around the pale lantern. The comb beater gives the final roll home. It is time to teach the carpet how to leave its wood. Leaving is measured. The master dampens the face with a reed brush, a last stroke from border to center, then covers it while the apprentices prepare the tools. A narrow knife with a safe edge, a bone pick, and shears with blades that know how to be patient. The warp ends below the last weft are counted and bound in small groups with cotton so nothing runs when the knife speaks. One apprentice slides a thin slat behind the lowest weft to lift the line. Another holds a tray to catch ends. The master cuts between groups of warp, snip, pause, snip, each cut like a respectful bow. The carpet relaxes and leans forward a finger's width, then becomes light in the hands that hold it. They lay it face down on clean mats. The loom stands a little surprised and then quiet, would remembering wait. Ends are not yet ends. The lower fringe warp groups now free receives in overcast binding, close stitches of strong cotton that walk from right to left, then left to right, locking the last weft into the fringe so the field can never wander. The binding is white today, later coil of wool the color of the guard stripe may dress it. For the side edges, the selvage cords are wrapped in a wool that matches the stripe brown with a whisper of cream rolled tight under the thumb so the edge feels round, not sharp. They turn the carpet face up. Light moves across the pile like a hand. The long-nosed shears kiss high tufts that forgot to be neighborly. A pumice wood sharpen shine. The master chooses the reed bundle again. He draws it from fringe to fringe, long strokes that teach the wool to lie in one direction. The lantern learns a low glow. Blue becomes lake. The nightingale hides and then appears again when the pile turns toward or away from light, as birds do when they think of moving. A shallow bowl receives warm water and a breath of soap. A linen cloth drinks and is wrung nearly dry. Stains are not welcome here, but dust is a fact of lanes and hands. They stroke the face with the cloth in wide circles, lifting what is not carpet and leaving what is. Along the pearl border, a fingertip wrapped in cloth makes each dot a little moon. The room smells of wool, water, and a memory of dye. Indigo's cool, madder's soft stone, walnut's quiet shell. While the face rests, the master writes on a small birch bark paper kept for such matters. Kashan, field blue, lantern cream, border pearls, vine with fruit, nightingale hidden. He adds the size, the month, and the gilt mark. The paper will travel with the carpet until it finds its floor. He tucks it into the rolled edge for now. They lift the carpet and carry it to the courtyard. Reed mats lie ready on warm tile. The carpet rests there face up to know the sun without learning it too well. A screen of woven palm fronds stands to one side. Light through it is sifted and kind. The master stands with his hands on the edge and lets his fingers recall the months inside its threads. Morning thuds of the beater, small scissor sounds, steam from dye pots, the visit of a patron, the day a warp needed a friend. Carpets learn people as much as people learn patterns. The merchant returns while the carpet listens to air. He removes his shoes and crosses the mat on his socks, spine respectful of a floor that is not yet a floor. He touches the pile with the back of his fingers, as before, and smiles with less caution this time. He follows the pearl border with his eyes, stands over the medallion and lantern until blue looks like water, and then kneels where the nightingale hides. He finds it, not at once, and his smile grows by degrees. He nods to the binding, the neat round of the selvage. He does not clap or exclaim. He breathes a word that in this room means yes. Silver changes hands, weight for weight. The saffron bag is replaced with one of dried limes for the kettle. The master wraps the carpet in a cotton sheet and ties it with a woven tape that knows how to give a little without letting go. He slides the birch bark slip under the tape and seals the knot with a dab of warm wax pressed by a ring no larger than a lentil. The merchant lifts one end, 2 apprentices lift the other. The roll moves like a well-behaved creature through the doorway and into the lane where shadow waits. The loom stands empty but not idle. Warps for the next design have already been measured on the courtyard pegs, a light ground with cypress trunks the width of a song. The apprentices sweep the room. Wool butterflies return to their jars. The reed bundle hangs by the window to dry in a shape that we'll remember tomorrow. The cartoon for the next piece smiles from a shelf, a new garden folded and quiet. The master sits a moment on the low bench with his palms on his knees. He does not pray aloud, but the room hears gratitude the way cotton hears tension. He writes a last line on the slip he will keep, cut and bound, reed polished, delivered. The bird knows where to rest. Evening begins to learn itself in the corridor. Someone carries the kettle to the brazier. A neighbor calls a greeting that mentions dates and shade. The carpet has gone to its room. This room remembers the carpet. Threads relax. Numbers soften. The comb beater on its hook looks like a still pendulum. And as the last light leaves the tiled courtyard and settles over the lane, we step without hurry through another doorway entirely, into a long, narrow room made of steel and wood, where lanterns lean and canvas bags sway. The world outside will blur past, but inside a steady hand will sort letters by town and mile, riding the soft heartbeat of the rails into the night. Dusk folds itself along the platform, and the mail car breathes a warm, careful light. Lanterns hang from their hooks like small suns that have agreed to be modest. Inside, canvas pouches sway from iron arms, tagged with towns that sound like steps on a road: Elkhart, Lima, Defiance, Findlay. The floor is wood laid lengthwise, worn to a quiet shine by boots that have traveled without leaving. At the far end, a pot stove ticks as it settles, warming a dented kettle that knows the hour without a clock. A clerk in sleeve garters unlocks the letter case. The front of the case is a wall of pigeonholes, some no larger than a postcard, others square enough to hold a handful of folded newspapers. Pencil labels live on the slats: state names, route numbers, cities that call to each other: Toledo STA, Detroit STA, Ohio 3DADV NIS. River mist, some slips are fresh, others carry faint ghosts of older towns rubbed out and replaced, history in smudged graphite. On a narrow shelf below, a stack of facing slips waits thin cards with printed lines that will name the bundles before they travel. A hand stamp rests nearby, its date ribbon already cracked, its circle of ink breathing calmly in the pad. The car shifts when the locomotive takes the first gentle pull on the coupler. Brass latches answer with a light clink. The clerk sets his feet wide, one toe under the kick rail along the base of the case. He slides a leather strap across his waist and hooks it to the stanchion, not tight, just a reminder that the train is a moving room with ideas of its own. Another clerk checks the pouch rack, iron arms spaced like ribs, making sure the catcher pouch sits nearest the mail door. Its mouth gapes and waits, reinforced with leather, tag wired firm, rope drawstring nested on the hook that will throw it home. A leather satchel marked RPO. Letters opens with a soft sigh. The first armful of letters comes out like a folded tide. They are already canceled at a city station, but their future is undecided. The clerk fans the stack with his thumb, square corners against his palm, and begins. Left hand chooses, right hand places. Memphis to South Rail and River, Fort Wayne to Indiana to DADV. Small towns with names like Creek, Circleville, Pico, then work into their state pockets. The little ones that no pocket expects the nixies go to a corner labeled Lookup. Every fourth letter gets a glance at its stamp to be sure nothing pretends to be more urgent than it is. The car's hum becomes a partner to the eyes. When the first pigeonholes begin to fill, the clerk takes a facing slip, writes the destination, and his initials, wraps it around the letters with a neat twist, and ties the bundle with cotton twine that remembers the knot. He leans, opens a pouch on the rack, drops the bundle with a papery hush, and swings the pouch back onto its arm. A second clerk works the circular hand stamp for a small handful of letters posted at the station after the city canceller went to sleep. The stamp's soft thud makes a steady punctuation under the wheels. The date ribbon clicks forward for the new day as the milepost bell rings its once. The distribution steam towns ordered like a map that chose to be a poem lies above the case on a board in thin strips, but it lives more truly behind the clerk's eyes. He learned it with cards, one town at a time, standing in his kitchen, muttering routes under his breath. Findlay via Fostoria, Van Buren via North Baltimore. Letters for Lima in advance to HIO3DADV. Until Toledo, the scheme changes when bridges change or when a river decides to disagree with a timetable. Tonight the board holds a fresh correction for a washtop trestle, all for Norwalk via Sandusky until further. The clerk touches the strip with a forefinger to make the change belong to his hands as well as his head. At the mail door, a clerk checks the catcher arm hinge oiled, spring snug, release lever easy under the thumb. Outside, along the right of way at small stations, a crane will stand with a mail sack hung on its iron arm. As the train slides past, not stopping, the clerk will swing the catcher arm out, time the moment by feel and lantern flash, and let the hook bring the sack into the car's depth in a single practice sweep. At the same breath, his partner will kick a pouch already tied, tagged, and faced out through the lower door to land on the station platform inside a canvas net. The exchange is a quiet dance arranged by wire and schedule and sleep-honoring skill. They test the bell cord that runs the length of the car to short tugs to the engineer to say ready, one long if anything impolite tries to happen. The car answers with small comments. Chain clinks, leather sighs, paper whispers. Somewhere in the consist of baggageman slides a door and finds his own order among trunks and crates. In the mail car's corner, a blue-gray pigeonhole labeled Clerk's Mail holds letters written on slow afternoons, postcards to wives, a money order for a sister's school books, a folded recipe for coffee cake with a note about sugar being dear. These will be faced and carried like all the others, neither above nor below the rest. The train gathers itself. The rail joint rhythm lengthens until it is almost a tone. Town names will pass invisibly along the walls as the night moves, signboards the clerks rarely see and always know. The case fills and empties in breaths. Newspapers arrive bundled, their cords cut with a twine knife that flips from the clerk's pocket to his hand and back like a trustworthy thought. Papers go to pouch mouths by county and route, each bundle carrying news that may already be older than the hour when it is read, and yet still welcomed as if it were warm bread. Now and then a letter asked for mercy address in a careful child's hand, Grandma, near the bridge, no town offered. The clerk sets it on the look-up shelf and, in a pause, pulls a directory book from the strap over the case. He finds the county by the name of the river, the town by the notice of a bridge, and the street by the list of families who share the surname. He writes a better address, places the letter in a pigeonhole that will see it closer to right, and moves on. The car does not hurry him. It reminds him. A small routine keeps the hour even. Every 20 minutes the canceling clerk rings the hand stamp, wiping its face with a soft rag to keep the circle clear. The pouch clerk checks tags and ties for order and pulls slack from ropes so that no burst mouth will surprise a station agent. The caseman sweeps clippings of paper into a shallow tray with the side of his hand, then tips them into a bin that smells like twine, ink, and old talk. The stove gets a finger of coal from a scuttle. The kettle answers with one more comfortable sound. A side note enters like a friend through the door. Many routes carry registered mail, locked in small leather pouches that weigh more than they look. Tonight there will be 2 brass tagged and sealed with soft lead stamped by a handheld die. They will live in a bolted safe under the clerk's bench, log by number and weight, signed for at stations with a blunt pencil and a nod. No drama, just care made visible. The first on-the-fly exchange comes near a low-lit platform where the station agent stands with a lantern at his hip. The crane's arm is already raised. The clerk at the capture post watches the dark opening become light, and then throat, and then nothing. He flips the lever, the iron arm swings, a soft, felted thud runs along the pole as the sack meets the hook. The pouch leaps inward, swings in a short arc, and is caught by a waiting hand that has done this in rain and in snow and in summer dust. At the same breath, the throw-off pouch slides away, out and down, landing in the net as if it had practiced all afternoon. The car keeps its hum. The men smile without speaking. Something that wanted to be complicated has agreed to be simple. After, there is a little coffee poured into enamel cups that have ridden more miles than some families. The clerk at the case keeps working while he drinks. The cup rests on the narrow shelf behind the facing slips, leaving a ring that will wipe away with a damp rag and a thought. A letter with a red forwarding hand finds its Newton and seems grateful. A bundle for a place with only one street gets tied loose so the postmaster's hand will not feel crowded. The engineer whistles once for a crossing that the mail car cannot see. The car's lap glass winks to the rhythm of joints and rails. Above the case, in the small space between lantern light and ceiling, the map in the clerk's head turns its quiet gears. Night lays its palm on the roof and rides along like an old friend who does not need to talk. The car lengthens into night without changing its breath. Outside, fields turn to a low hum of fence posts and hedges. Inside, the case keeps its square music. The clerk's left hand learns a weight 20 letters feels different from 30. An envelope with a money order inside drags the stack by a whisper. His right hand has learned small distances by bone, 3 pigeonholes, to the right for northern ad, a long reach down for local to the del. The scheme on the board overhead is tidy, but the real scheme lives behind the eyes like a quiet river. It flows without needing to be spoken. Every hour the case man tests himself. He pulls down the strap of cards, little rectangles with town names and routes and fans 5 without looking. Ottawa via Lima, Tiffin via Fostoria, Washington via Toledo, Shelby via Crestline, Galleon direct. He places each card back in order, not to show off, only to keep the path smooth under his feet. This may seem fussy, but the scheme is a fence in the dark. It keeps a mind from wandering into a field that does not belong to tonight. The second on-the-fly exchange arrives at a stop that hardly thinks of itself as a town. The station agent's lantern makes a small, sure circle on the platform. The crane lanes out with its mail sack like an elbow offering a sleeve. The catcher clerk sets his shoulder, counts the posts by feel 1, 2, there and swings the arm. The hook takes the sack with a muffled, satisfied thud. At that same beat the throw-off pouch leaves the car like a well-taught word already faced and tied to tell its story before anyone asks. The canvas net receives it with a low whomp that the clerks can hear even with the door closed. The car does not slow. In the rack, the new sack sits down among its cousins, tag out, rope tucked. A small ritual follows each catch. The sack's mouth is loosened, the rope is wrapped into a figure 8 and fit back into itself. The clerk fingers the tag station, train number, time and initial it lightly with a pencil so soft it does not shout. The sack's canvas is brushed with a stiff hand broom to knock loose cinder dust. The bag then goes to the floor at the caseman's left, where it will empty into his hands as soon as the current heap is cleared. The broom returns to its hook, handle polished by many nights. A bell cord gives 2 short tugs to say ready to a crossing where the train must drop the speed of its thought, not its motion. The engineer replies, with a note the clerks do not analyze. It sits under their work like the drone under chant. The canceling clerk rings the hand stamp, turning the date wheels with 2 careful clicks and pressing the die into the pad until the circle shines wet but not dripping. He stamps 1 test on scrap, glances at the clean ring, and continues. The stamp's rhythm joins the case's whisper in a pattern the body understands. Thud, rustle. Thud, rustle, cup on shelf, twine, click. Word travels down the train in a polite way. A brakeman appears in the doorway, hat pushed back, coat open to show a vest with a watch pocket that knows its job. He leans in without crossing the threshold and says, "Bridget Sand Creek out since the storm." Dispatch swings you north at Standish to ride the upper line to Bay City, then back. The clerk at the steamboard nods and lifts the strip with Sandusky dust. He pins a new notice, Norwalk, Monroeville, Bellevue hold for Bay City transfer. The caseman leans to read it, then says aloud, not loud, "All Norwalk area via Bay City for handover," so his mouth, ears, and hands can learn it together. He reaches for the pigeonholes that hold the 3 towns and slides their labels to hold. Nothing complicated, only a lane moved one over, a river crossed by a different bridge, a habit that will serve until the trestle remembers how to be a trestle again. Newspapers arrive, wrapped in twine that remembers the knot it wants. The twine knife whispers along the cord. Bundles become sheaves, sheaves become small stacks by county and route. The caseman feeds them into pouches with names that sound like lines on a map someone could draw with a fingertip. North BLT. And Branch Huron CU. ADV Lakeshore Misk. When a bundle breaks and a single broadsheet tries to slip away like a fish, the clerk taps it twice with the flat of his hand and tucks it under a healthier stack. News travels by courtesy as much as by speed. Midnight thinks about arriving. Coffee keeps the thought companionable. The kettle gives its small permission sound when the lid lifts. Ground coffee scoops from a tin with a measuring spoon older than any clerk in the car. Water falls in a thin thread to wake the grounds, then in a small circle to finish. The canceller sets the pot at the cool edge of the stove and returns to letters while steam finds the roof and decides to be kind. Cups line the shelf, enameled metal with small chips that tell their own roots. The caseman takes his with 1 sugar and no cream, steadying the cup in the crook of his left elbow while his right continues the pockets. Bay City hold, Detroit SDA, OHIO 3DADV. Canvas asked for care as well. Between sacks, the catcher clerk rubs the mouth of the most traveled pouch with a little cake of wax so the rope slides without biting. He checks leather reinforcements for thin places and stitches one with a curved needle and twine while the train curves through a cut where sound gathers. A worn tag string is replaced. The old one is tied to a nail by the door, a small habit that reminds the room what has already been spared. These small attentions keep the night from collecting trouble. A side note rides in softly. Registered pouches clink differently. One arrives at the next catch, lead seal stamped with a number like a low doorbell. It goes under the bench into the safe, where a ledger book waits with lines already drawn. Weight and number are written with a slow pencil. The clerk signs, then touches the page to feel the graphite sit. When the pouch is delivered, the ledger will receive another signature and a small check mark that means went where it meant to. A letter appears with a story in its look, ink brown and steady, address a little formal. To the station agent, Sandusky, kindly forward to farm near Reed's Mill. The scheme knows Reed's Mill is not a post office but a place people say when they mean halfway. To the mill. With the bridge out, Sandusky will not meet the mail tonight. The clerk picks up a green forwarding slip, writes via Bay City, hold for handover, and clips it to the envelope's corner. He sets the letter in a pigeonhole that has no name, only a promise, then returns his hand to the stream. Midnight arrives without ceremony. The case man takes a bite of a sandwich wrapped in waxed paper and thin enough to be polite bread from a bakery that has winked at the car through its window many a night. He sets the paper aside, folds a facing slip around a stack, and ties with twine in a square knot that has traveled farther than he has. The canceling clerk wipes the stamp's face with the soft rag again, turning the date wheels one day forward while muttering the new date so it will belong to his mouth as well as the die. At Standish, the detour begins. The train eases onto a line the clerks know less well. The scheme above the case wears fresh strips now. Bay City Direct, Saginaw Transfer, Flint Hold to DADV. The case man's hands slow half a breath as memory checks itself, then find their speed again. A potch for Norwalk is tied and tagged Bay City HO with a facing slip that names each town inside. The catcher clerk sets it by the door, far from the throw-off so no pouch goes to the wrong arm in a loyal but misinformed hurry. The next catch happens under a sky that has decided to be milk instead of coal. The station agent's lantern swings in a small arc. Frost on the platform boards returns the light in a soft whisper. The hook takes the sack, the throw-off lands, the door closes with a wooden assurance. Inside, the new sack offers up letters for towns that were strangers an hour ago. The case man reads once, touches the scheme strip, and makes friends quickly. Pinconning Direct, Linwood via Bay City, Caucalan via Saginaw. The names feel like new coins that will be pocket-torn by morning. Between exchanges the stove accepts a small shake. Ash sifts like gray flour into its pan. The kettle moves closer to the circle where heat is confident. Someone sets a slice of the sandwich on the lid for a handful of breaths to wake its warmth. Coffee passes hand to hand with the ease of long habit. A tin of evaporated milk appears, its hole cut small, its lid folded back neatly. One clerk draws a line of milk into his cup and nods a thanks that means more than a word. The look-up shelf gains a letter addressed in lavender ink to Aunt Lou, care of the mill, the yellow house with the porch. The directory book comes down again. Spine agreeing to open to the county page. The clerk traces with a blunt fingertip. Mill on the tributary, 3 yellow houses on the road, one with a porch. A name appears beside it like a door. He writes the town, street, and family name in a steady hand, gives the envelope a small encouraging tap, and posts it to the correct pocket. It will be ordinary by the time it arrives, which is the best kind of miracle. Somewhere after 1 o'clock, the car's light feels warmer. Not brighter, more familiar. The canceller takes a turn at the case so the caseman can stretch his hands and walk the length of the car once. Boots on wood, 3 steps up, 3 back, a glance at the safe, a check at the catcher hinge, a look at the rope bucket. He returns to his place, slips the leather strap across his waist, and lets his hands find the stream again. The train leans into a curve, and the case leans with it, both of them keeping the letters in the line the night has agreed upon. The detour begins to unwind. The steam will return to its usual face after the handover at Bay City. The clerks can feel the map inside their heads flex and then settle. The work has not changed, only the names on the lips have. A pouch thumps down the rack with the certainty of something that has been told the truth. The car's hum stays kind. Ink keeps its temper. Canvas learns one more set of hands. Coffee holds the R steady. The letters cross each other's paths without colliding, each one believing it is the only traveler that matters, and for a quiet second in the caseman's palm, each one is. Bay City arrives the way a harbor does, lights first, then quiet voices behind glass, then the feel of level ground under the wheels. The train eases, not quite stopping, and then deciding to. The mail car's lanterns hold their calm circles as the brakes sigh a long, polite sentence. Outside the mail door, a station clock shows a time that looks correct even if no one consults it. The platform boards have the gloss that only winter and sweeping can teach. The catcher arm is folded and last. Tonight's handover wants open doors and steady hands, not the hook's quick language. The clerk slides the upper door, then the lower, and braces his boots against the sill. A station man steps into the lantern light with his cap at an honest angle and a clipboard that believes in pencils. He does not climb aboard. He waits at the line where platform becomes car and lets his voice travel the last few inches. Bay City transfer, he says, and the words feel like a bridge being lowered. The rack begins to empty itself of pouches with tags that now find their person. Saginaw, Pinconning direct, Norwalk HO, Bellevue HO, each pouch is swung down, rope checked, tag read aloud and answered, then set on a two-wheeled truck that waits like a patient animal on the platform. The clerk signs the station book with a pencil the size of a fingerling potato. The page accepts his name, the train number, the time, the count. Both men look at the figures, no hurry, just making sure the page remembers what the hands did. Registered comes next. The safe under the bench opens with a key that has learned to turn only for the hand that keeps it. Two small leather pouches emerge, lead seals bright as muted coins. The ledger sits ready, columns for number, weight, origin, destination, signatures. The clerk reads each number and town. The station man reads them back, touches the seals with a thumb as if listening for a pulse, signs his name in a careful hand, and places the pouches into his own lockbox, which clicks shut like a promise. In return, the station man offers one registered pouch for the southbound leg later in the night. Its seal wears a different die mark, but the sound it makes when set down in the safe is the same small, confident clink. The ledger acquires two more lines, and the page feels complete. While this measured dance takes place, an apprentice clerk in this car, everyone is a clerk, even if some are new men's a tag string that decided to surrender at the wrong time. He cuts the frayed cotton back to honesty, ties a fisherman's knot to overhands back to back, pulls it snug, and rubs the knot across a cake of beeswax so it will slip without failing. He tests the draw through the tag's eye twice and smiles to no one. Small repairs keep midnight from becoming exciting. The handover ends with a last check of the truck's load. The station man places his clipboard under his arm and touches the brim of his cap in a way that is not a salute but a mutual good night. The lower door slides in, the upper follows. A bell cord whispers, and somewhere ahead a gloved hand acknowledges. The train lifts itself like a blanket being turned and moves. Inside, the skiing board changes clothes once more. The detour strips lift and set aside. The familiar routes take their places again. Northern ADV returns to its old neighbors. OHIO3D regains its corner. Bay City Direct becomes transfer in a small, neat hand that will be erased by morning. The caseman touches each strip as if greeting a friend who has come back from a short trip. His hands find their old distances at once. The case is thinner now. Pigeonhole so wood at the back where an hour ago the towers of letters pressed forward like politely crowded audiences. The clerk works with the same slow accuracy. Fewer pieces do not ask for less care. A handful of look-up strays find their towns with the help of the directory book. One letter to an aunt who shares her name with half a county. Another to a boarding house that has moved across a street since last winter. Addresses are adjusted, the envelopes shrug and accept the change. A side routine keeps time as the wheels knit the rails. Every bundle dropped into a pouch is counted in a tally that lives on a card tucked into the case's molding pouches by destination. Bundles by class, newspapers by county. The pencil that writes these numbers is never sharp enough to be proud. It likes to be quiet on paper. The stove gets a companionable shake. Ash settles into its pan with the sound of sifted flour. The kettle slides back to the center and gives a soft answer when the lid clicks. The canceling clerk wipes the face of the hand stamp, turns the date wheels a fraction to keep in step with the miles, and tests on a scrap. The circle prints clean as a coin. He stamps a small handful of postcards that wandered aboard at a flag-stop views of bridges and fairs and a lake scene in daylight that the car will not share tonight. In the pouch rack, a mouth has learned the bad habit of drooping. The catcher clerk takes it down and threads the rope through the grommets again, using the same path the canvas expected, only neater. He ties a bowline one small rabbit out of the hole, or on the tree back into the hole and works the knot with 2 fingers until it remembers to be calm. A touch of beeswax along the rope's wear line, a press of the thumb to the tag's hole to make sure the paper will not tear when the station man takes hold. And the pouch returns to its arm proud but not stiff. The route turns gently east. The map inside the clerk's head makes a soft click as if a gear seated. He can almost feel home rails under the floorboards, though there is no change a stranger would notice. The names in the case begin to sound like Morning Toledo on the tongue differently now, Detroit a little closer to the wrist. The air in the car feels cooler even as the stove keeps its small sun steady. Windows show the faintest suggestion of something less than black near their top edges. The train does not speed up, the night simply thins. Bundles dwindle to 1s and 2s. The caseman takes the moment to straighten labels that had been nudged by many fingers. He rubs a soft rag over the shelf where facing slips rest so the ink smudge from a cup will wait for another day. The twine ball shows its cardboard heart. A fresh ball takes its place with a practiced tug that finds the end hidden under the first layer. He sets aside 3 empty canvas sacks that have earned a wash and writes a small note on their tags, soil ink and coal, not food. The laundry will appreciate the difference. Another registered exchange comes at a short platform that stands like a sentence, fragment in snow. The station man this time is young, his cap a little ambitious on his head. He holds his lockbox as if it might decide to be heavy. The lead seals get the same careful look, numbers read and answered, ledger lines made. The young hand trembles once at a signature and then steadies. The clerk nods toward the safe with his chin as if to say, You're doing all of this the right way, and the young man's shoulders remember where they are supposed to sit. A letter addressed general delivery, until we get a place, goes into the proper pocket with a small goodwill that the scheme cannot require and yet always suggests. Another addressed only Lena, works at the diner, earns a look in the directory under businesses. The clerk writes the street with a small arrow on the envelope's corner. The diner will do the rest. The mail car's job is to move a letter within reach. Hands in daylight will finish the last few feet. The stove ticks, as if counting. The kettle offers what it can. Cups accept it with uncomplicated gratitude. Someone splits an apple with a pocket knife and sets half on the shelf near the case, where its smell occupies a square of air exactly its own size. The case man eats his half standing, eyes on addresses, fingers learning the stick of juice and finding that it does not interfere with twine. Bay City falls behind. The detour is complete. Home rails feel like a story remembered word for word. The steam strips need no more touching for the moment. The catcher arm is ready to begin for the small towns that will wake before dawn and take their bundles from a sleepy agent with a wool scarf and a pencil behind his ear. The case thins another layer. The backboards look almost bare. The quiet becomes more itself, and the night lifts one shade lighter at the window glass. Not yet morning, only its first seam, enough to make the lantern flame look warmer. Enough to tell hands that the long fold of dark is starting to open. Pre-dawn moves along the windows like breath on cool glass. Frost has found the corners where the lantern light does not reach and writes its fern patterns without asking. The car keeps its steady voice wheel rhythm. Stove tick, stamp thud, and the clerks keep theirs. The catcher arm is unlocked again, hinge easy, spring patient, lever smooth under a thumb that has pressed it in every month of the year. At the next small platform the world is the color of tin. A scarf station agent stands with his lantern tucked low to keep the flame from remembering wind. The crane lifts its sack into the path of the car. The catcher clerk counts fence posts by habit, swings, and receives. The sack bumps in with that felted, agreeable sound, and a throw-off pouch slips out and down into the net, tied for Ridgeway all. The door slides shut. Frost curls back from the jam and thinks better of staying. Letters from the new sack spill onto the case shelf with the soft hush of pages turning. The caseman fans the stack once to see the towns in it as a little line of geography. Hands answer without comment. Mamiestier, Sylvania to Del, Detroit Estier. To postcards show summer water and the shape of a lighthouse that the night cannot use but still likes to hear about. They are faced and joined by a cotton tie whose ends know the square knot without looking. A missorted bundle reveals itself politely. A pouch marked Huron seal. ADV yields one tight packet for a station that belongs to another line altogether. The tag says so, the stamps say so, the scheme in the clerk's head agrees. Nothing dramatic follows. The clerk unwinds the twine, keeps the facing slip, writes a new slip for transfer terminal, and ties the letters into a calm bundle that will take a different desk at daylight. He adds a pencil note on the old slip, "Air," to Huron wrecked here, and tucks it under the new one so the story will be clear without scolding. The bundle goes into a pouch whose mouth has learned to welcome such guests. Cups find the kettle one more time. The coffee is not strong, it is reliable. Steam fogs a circle on the lantern glass and then clears. The canceling clerk turns the date ribbon half a click to keep company with the miles, tests the stamp on scrap, and returns to the flow. The ink pad, when touched, says it is awake. A small rag wipes the handle so the next hour will not collect a film of coal dust. Pouches get their quiet grooming. The catcher clerk runs a thumb along the rope channel of a busy bag, rubs the path with wax, and checks the leather ears where the tag's wire sits. One ear looks tired. A curved needle with waxed twine makes 3 short stitches that add a year to its mood. The needle goes back into its cork. The bag returns to its arm. A tag string with a knot that wants to be proud is pressed flat between finger and thumb until it remembers humility. The skein thins toward home. The board above the case hardly needs looking now, and yet the clerk glances up, letting his eyes touch the strips the way one touches the top of a gate when passing through. Labels on the pigeonholes stand straight. A pencil mark that had wandered is rubbed back into manners with a damp corner of a rag. The look-up shelf holds only 2 letters, one to Grandpa near the cut and one to Room 2 over the store. The directory gives both the addresses they were missing with the same patience it gives to towns that have longer names. Frost thickens on the outside of the glass. Inside breath makes a small cloud when someone laughs, and then it is gone. The stove eats a last, careful scoop of coal. Ash settles with the sound of sifted flour. The kettle accepts one more appointment with heat and shows a quiet tremble at the lid. A tin of evaporated milk sits on the shelf with its little triangle opening turned toward the light like a shire. Pouches on the rack begin to be arranged for arrival. The clerk set them in the order the platform will prefer. First off, closest to the door, heavy ones low like ones high, registered under lock until the last minute. Tags are turned so the station name reads like a sentence. Toledo City, Detroit STA outlying transfer, rural dispatch. Facing slips peek from bundle edges just enough to be found by daylight hands. The catcher arm, faithful all night, is latched for the last few miles. On-the-fly exchanges are done. Now there will be open doors and voices that keep their volume. Modest, tallies come due. The caseman's pencil travels the card fixed with a brad above his shelf. Pouches made, bundles by class, cards by count, circulars by weight. Numbers sit in their boxes without showing off. He copies totals into a small ledger that will be signed at the terminal, the way night remembers itself for the morning. The canceller, for his part, notes the hand-stamped pieces by hour and the extra cancels done for strays. The catcher clerk lists the on-the-fly sacks received and thrown, jotting mileposts in the margin so a question tomorrow will have a place to sit. The safe under the bench receives its last check. Registered pouches inside are counted aloud, 2 outgoing, 1 incoming. The ledger's lines already carry the numbers. The saying is a courtesy between hands and eyes. The key on its short chain makes its small, specific sound when turned. The chain is clipped to its ring again and lies flat, a little comma at the end of a careful sentence. Closing the case is a ritual, not a rush. The clerk chooses one pigeonhole no longer needed, removes its label, wipes the slot with a rag that smells of soap and paper, and sets the label upright in a little stack to be rewritten fresh for the return run. He does this for each hole as it empties, leaving the case looking like a wall of clean windows. The shelf beneath gets a slow pass with the damp rag. The smudge of coffee ring disappears. Twine ends, pencil shavings, and paper crumbs go into a shallow bin that once held nails, and now holds the night's leavings. The bin's lid closes with a small, wooden sigh. Lanterns are trimmed just enough to keep the flame polite for the last tasks. The canceller wipes the stamp face one more time and caps the pad. The scheme strips are left in place for the sane route homeward. A small paper clip marks the change to River Bridge out, which may or may not be true by evening. A chalk mark on a board by the door says, in a hand that does not need to be handsome, the tour used. Bay City X for good. To miss sorts corrected. Registered queer. The train eases into yard limits where switches think more than rails do. The car feels the slow choreography underfoot, slack gone, slack taken. A gentle tug to the right as a turnout remembers its angle. Yard lights make little moons in the window corners. A brakeman on the step shows a lantern signal that is half a nod and half a wave. The bell begins its town voice. The platform returns, this time long and level and made for morning. Doors open in the way of practiced things. Calder steps in, not rudely. The first truck rolls under the sill, iron wheels speaking softly on wood. Pouches pass shoulder to shoulder, tags read and answered, facing slips showing their neat words. Registered comes last again. The safe opens, numbers are said, seals are felt with a respectful thumb, signatures sit down in the ledger where they belong. A station clerk with a pencil behind his ear catches the bundles with a habit that looks like kindness. The case is nearly bare. 2 letters wait, one for a clerk's own house, addressed by a child, posted on a day off and carried all night for the small pleasure of it. Another to a boarding room down the street from the terminal, printed carefully by someone who learned writing after work. They are faced, tied simply, and placed in the pouch for CITYSTA, like any others. The kettle is poured off, and the stove's door is cracked to think about cooling. Yard voices grow a shade louder without becoming loud. A whistle farther down the platform tells some other story about freight or passengers that the mail car does not need to know. The catcher arm is folded tight and latched for rest. The leather waist strap is unhooked and coiled on its nail. The pencil that wrote the night's numbers lies down on the shelf and looks smaller than it did at dusk. The last bundle slides into the last pouch. The rope finds its knot. The tag looks up and says the terminal's name as if it had been planning to say it all along. The door closes halfway, waiting for the final handover. Morning is not yet full. It stands at the edge of the platform like someone early to market, hat in hand. Inside the car, the air smells of canvas, ink hull, and queen wood, an inventory of useful things in good temper. The night is folded and put away without creases. Morning does not arrive at once. It loosens the dark from the platform boards and tucks a thin gray along the roof line, then lends the lantern light a small, friendly weakness. The train slows with a long breath. The brake shoes speak in a tone the car has heard every day of its life. Inside, the clerks finish motions they have practiced for years, as if they had just invented them. The lower mail door slides open to the kind of cold that minds its manners. Trucks stand ready, iron wheels neat, wood handles smoothed by many seasons. A station clerk with a pencil behind his ear steps into the wedge of light and nods, as if he and the car have been talking all night and are finishing an easy sentence. Pouches pass shoulder to shoulder, Toledo City, Detroit STA outlying transfer, rural dispatch. Each tag is read aloud and answered. Each rope is felt for the firmness. That means the knot will not change its mind. Each mouth is checked for a clean draw. Bundles drop into big bags with a hush like pages agreeing to be a book. Facing slips peep from their places just enough to be found by daylight hands. When a truck fills, it rolls away along planks that know the sound of morning work. Registered has its own measured time. The safe opens, the key turns with the same small sound it made at dusk. The clerk reads the pouch numbers, the towns, the weights. The station man gathers them into his lockbox, touches each lead seal with a thumb, and signs in a careful hand that leaves no doubt. The ledger takes the signatures and looks complete. The clerk draws a line under the page, then a small check mark that means in order. The case is almost bare now. One card sits in a pigeonhole labeled Clerk's Mail, a postcard with a child's drawing of a house, and a cat that looks like a cloud. It is faced and tied with two others and placed into CITYSDA, like any letter from the night. Another room to over the store goes with it. The distribution scheme above the case receives a final glance, then a nod. Strips left in place for the return. One paper clip still marking the bridge detour that might or might not be finished by evening. Closing begins. It is quiet work with simple tools. The canceling clerk wipes the stamp's face with a soft rag and caps the ink pad. The date wheels are turned to rest. The hand stamp goes to its hook with the handle pointing down so dust will not choose it. The twine ball is wrapped and slipped into its tin. The tin lid closes with a click that sounds like a button going home. The stove is banked. A last small shovelful of coal settles into the glow. The damper draws halfway to teach the fire to remember warmth without appetite. The ash pen slides out. Ash falls like sifted flour into a bucket. The bucket goes on the platform to be emptied where it will not excite the day. The stove's door closes. A thumb tests the latch. The pot comes off the lid and pours its last inch of comfort into an enamel cup that sits within the edge of a palm like a bird. Sweeping is a complete thought. A stiff broom walks the length of the car, head low, talking to the grain of the boards. Paper crumbs that escaped pockets and shelves gather in a small, obedient drift. A brush with shorter bristles follows along the base rail under the case, coaxing out the pencil shavings and twine tails that like to hide there. All of it goes into a shallow bin that once held nails and now holds the memory of the night. The bin's lid closes with a wooden sigh. The catcher arm, faithful and a little proud, gets its own care. The hinge receives a breath of oil from a can with a spout like a small beak. The spring is pulled and let go, and pulled again to say yes to another night. The leather pad where hooks meet canvas is rubbed with a thumb so it will be soft to the next sack that tries to be stubborn. The arm folds in and latches with a sound that always feels like a word meaning rest. The case labels come down one by one. Each slips from its slot, is wiped with a damp corner of cloth, and stacked with its friends in a wooden tray. The wood back of the pigeonholes looks like a wall of small, neat windows. The narrow shelf where cups sometimes sit is wiped, until the faint ring of coffee vanishes. The facing slips left over are squared into a bundle and wrapped with a band of paper. The pencil that wrote so many tidy names lies on top like a sign-off. Tallies go from card to book in a hand that does not rush. Pouches by destination, bundles by class, newspapers by county, registered by number. The clerk adds a note that will help tomorrow's questions find quick chairs, Detour Bay City transfer good. To miss sorts corrected in car. Rope replaced on busy pouch rack no. 3. He adds his initials and the time. The numbers look like small fences that keep a garden orderly. Hands wash in a round enamel basin that knows how to be carried without slopping. Water from a pitcher, a sliver of soap kept in a tin, a rag that is always kinder than it looks. Ink leaves the web between thumb and forefinger. Coal dust lets go of the curve of each nail. Towels hang back on their hook to dry with dignity. Sleeve garters come off and coil into themselves. The leather waist strap is unhooked and hung by its ring. It looks like a line drawn on a map that now says return later. Before the door closes, each clerk lets his eye pass over the room once more. Safe lock chain flat, lock clicks. Steam board straight clips holding. Case bare labels stacked. Stove bank damper half. Lantern wicks turned down to the shy end of flame. Pouches gone, rack arms empty. Hooks at rest. Rope bucket coiled. Twine tin shut. Hand stamp capped and hung. It is not a list on paper, it is a list the hands know. A last glance finds nothing that wants a word. Trucks roll away toward the station's sorting floor. Through the half-open door, the clerks watch bundles disappear into a room with long tables where daylight will sort city routes by the names of streets and the shoulders of carriers. A postmaster with a round key will open a pigeonhole that feeds the general delivery window. A clerk with ink on one finger will stamp a stack in a rhythm different from the cars. Someone down the platform wheels out a little cart with hot buns under a cloth. The smell lifts across the boards like a handshake. The mail door slides shut. The latch answers with its small certainty. The upper door follows, and the window within it finds its catch. The car is not dark, it keeps a low flame, but it understands this is not its hour. The clerks step onto the platform. Their boots learn the morning boards, which are slightly damp and honest. Breath pairs with the air and vanishes without argument. Ledgers and pouch receipts go to the station office for signing. And the pen there is different fountain. Not pencil, but it writes the same simple words. Names sit under lines that remember train numbers. The station clock, that calm face, says what it always says, a moment that can be trusted. Papers are handed back across a counter where many hands have rested. A hat is touched. A small joke is shared about coffee that tastes better in a moving room than in one that stands still. The joke is not new, it is welcome. Back at the car, a last small task waits. A chalk mark on the board by the door reads Bay City X4 with a small check beside it. The check gets a circle done. The circle looks like a wheel. A broom leans into its corner as if listening to the boards. The key that locks the mail door does its job and yields with a sound no one needs to hear twice. They stand a moment longer than needed. Not in ceremony, simply because the room that worked with them all night is still a room they like. If there is pride in the way their shoulders ease, it is the quiet kind that does not need witnesses. Pouches that went where they meant to, names that found the right pockets. Small things mended before they could ask for attention. The car smells of ink and canvas, coal and clean wood, the way work smells when it has been done kindly. The platform wakes by inches. A baker opens a door and lets out a warm breath. A newspaper boy adjusts his cap. A street sweeper leans his broom against a lamppost to light a cigarette and then decides not to. The clerks step down to the cinders, cross the yard path and follow boards that know their boots. A city the color of steam is beginning to speak. They will sleep later in rooms that know them. The car will sleep now, stove banked, case bare, arm folded. Delight will carry the letters the last streets to hands that will open them. The train, after a while, will turn and learn the route in the other direction with the same patient heart. The night is folded and put away. The morning agrees to keep it. Now these quiet hours will keep you company as you rest. Thank you for listening, and sweet dreams.